Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander the moonlit streets of Georgian London, a city where the fog curls like pipe smoke through narrow alleys. The taverns glow warmly behind warped glass, and a surprising number of people are tucking into eggs and kidneys at, well past midnight. That's right. Breakfast, for many Londoners in the 18th century, often arrived just after the opera let out. The brawls died down and the stars came out. You might imagine sleepy bakers and yawning merchants just waking up with the sun, rubbing their eyes and preparing porridge. But Georgian London says, no, thank you. We're eating now, after the party, before the hangover kicks in, while the coals are still warm and the coffee is thick enough to hold a spoon upright. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive this version of breakfast. Not just because the sausages might contain a bit of mystery, but because Georgian hygiene was more of a philosophical concept than a practice. And if you think breakfast in your bed at 7:30 is decadent, try it with powdered wigs, leftover champagne, and a strong chance of stepping in something unpleasant on the way home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from anywhere unusual, maybe a cabin in the Alps or the back of a night shift truck, let me know your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're stepping out into a London street, around the year 1765. The night air is heavy with smoke, a little coal dust, and that curious perfume of roast chestnuts mingling with horses. The cobblestones are damp from an earlier drizzle, and they glisten under the faint glow of oil lamps swinging slightly in the breeze. You're not alone. In fact, the city is far from asleep. There's the unmistakable clatter of carriage wheels in the distance, and the occasional echoing laugh of someone who's clearly had one too many at the theatre. You pass a pair of gentlemen in crumpled satin waistcoats arguing over a spilled pudding. A few streets over, a servant girl balances a tray of bread rolls wrapped in linen as she dodges a rat the size of a small dog. Midnight, but your stomach grumbles. Fortunately, you're in the right century for it. A small tavern on the corner beckons with its door slightly ajar, letting out a spill of warm light and the scent of boiled eggs, fried mushrooms, and something possibly involving kidneys. It's cosy inside, with wooden beams blackened by years of candle smoke and a long bench where a few half-dozing patrons lean into their tankards. One is asleep on a plate. No one seems to mind. The tavern keeper, a broad woman with arms like tree trunks and a laugh like a cracked bell, nods as you sit. "Breakfast, love?" she asks, even though it's closer to 1 a.m. than 7. What arrives is not your idea of a dainty morning meal. No cereal in sight, no orange juice either. Instead, there's a dense slab of toast, fried in drippings, topped with chopped veal and mushrooms. A poached egg leans precariously on one side like it's unsure if it belongs. A pot of coffee sits beside a tiny dish of sugar lumps and a suspicious bottle labelled rum tonic. This, dear listener, is Georgian breakfast. And yes, it's supposed to come at this hour. You might ask, why? Why are Londoners eating breakfast when surely they should be asleep? Well, there's no easy answer. But several things make this world different. First, nightlife. Georgian London is the height of theatre, gambling, and scandalous assemblies. The day's excitement doesn't begin to wind down until well after midnight. When you finally leave the music hall or finish losing money on dice, you want something warm in your belly, preferably involving eggs and grease. Second, lighting. Candles and lamps make true nightfall. Negotiable. If you've got the means, you can push back the darkness and stretch your evening well into the small hours. And the richer you are, the later you tend to wake and eat. Some fashionable households don't rise until noon, which makes 1 a.m. breakfast almost reasonable. Third, social patterns. Many working-class folks start their shifts long before dawn. Think bakers, coach drivers, watchmen. For them, 2 a.m. might actually be the middle of the workday. A hot meal now keeps the body moving. Still, even Georgian commentators raised eyebrows. One snooty pamphlet from 1772 complains about the newfangled fashion of meat at midnight, when digestion sleeps and folly wakes. That's a line worth embroidering on a pillow. Historians still argue whether this midnight dining habit was widespread or mostly confined to urban elites and their late-night service economy. Some insist it was more theatrical than nutritional, a ritualized end to an evening of excess, rather than a true beginning to a day. But whatever the case, you're in it now. A fiddler is playing in the corner, someone is reciting poetry in a voice 3 notches too loud, and a pair of dusty labourers just ordered oysters with stout. The coffee, by the way, is startlingly strong, possibly illegal in several countries. It was often brewed in big copper pots and left on heat for hours. Over time, it grows thicker, blacker, and more likely to support a spoon vertically. Sugar is precious, still mostly imported from Caribbean plantations, so you ration it carefully. Or like some locals, you skip it and chase each bitter sip with a bite of fruit-studded bread. There's a moment, mid-slurp, mid-bite, when you realise just how upside down this feels. This is the hour modern folks assign to sleep, not sausages. But here, it's normal, or normal enough. Georgian London thrives in this ambiguity, where day and night blur and the rules bend like a spoon in a too-hot stew. Outside, the sound of hooves on cobblestone reminds you that the city never truly sleeps. It naps, it dozes, but it also dines, laughs, sings, and yes, eats breakfast, long after midnight. You lean back, stomach warming, eyes drooping. The tavern spins lazily with flickering candlelight, and the edges of the scene begin to soften, like a dream getting comfortable. And just as you're slipping into that blurry, blissful daze, someone at the next table orders black pudding with extra onions, because of course they do. You step back outside, full-bellied and a little dazed, and the city meets you with open arms and open eyes. This isn't some fleeting late-night detour. It's a whole other world, quietly awake while most imagine it's asleep. Georgian London, for all its cobbled charm and powdered pretensions, is a nocturnal creature at heart. You make your way down Milk Street, which, despite the name, currently smells more like burnt ale and stale tobacco. A couple of boys, chimney sweeps, judging by the soot covering everything but their eyes, dart past you, hooting like owls. Behind you, a grocer mutters to himself while dragging a crate of turnips into a shuttered storefront. Everyone's busy doing something. Midnight? Barely a suggestion. And then you see it. A small group of lamplighters moving along Cheapside, tall poles in hand, prodding sleepy flames back to life or snuffing out the spent ones. One hums a tune that's almost a lullaby. For someone. The city's dark rhythm depends entirely on its cast of strange, unsung night shift performers. Take the bakers, for instance. While the rest of London lies horizontal, these flour-dusted spectres have already been up for hours, wrestling dough in underground ovens hot enough to make your eyebrows retreat. You peek down an alley and catch the orange glow of a bakehouse, its iron grates steaming, the smell of fresh bread hitting you like a punch of nostalgia you didn't know you had. It turns out Georgian bakers are the closest thing the city has to timekeepers. Their schedules are brutal. Midnight mixing, 2 a.m. kneading, 3:30 oven time, and by 5 they're pulling out golden loaves to be hawked by boys in caps shouting "Hot buns!" before dawn. Breakfast, it seems, doesn't just arrive. It marches out of fire at unreasonable hours. Meanwhile, there's another figure haunting the dark, the link boy. You spot one perched on a stoop, holding a torch almost as tall as himself. For a penny, he'll light your way down London's murky alleys, protecting you from both ditches and pickpockets. He's about 12, wearing a ragged waistcoat and a look that says he's already seen things you haven't. Not far off, a watchman trudges by, swinging a lantern and rattling his clapper. He announces the time with all the theatrical flair of a town crier. 2 o'clock and all's well. You're not sure if it's true, but you appreciate the sentiment. Even the city's darker elements flourish under moonlight. The thieves, those cheeky shadows in borrowed coats, prefer the cover of fog and oil smoke. Georgian crime is less cloak and dagger and more smash and run. Someone once tried to rob an apothecary using a dead fish. True story. The thief claimed it was symbolic. The judge disagreed. But not all nocturnal residents are dodgy or dough-covered. Servants make up a huge portion of the night workforce, especially in the homes of the wealthy, where time is more of a suggestion than a structure. You pass a grand townhouse just as a footman in a powdered wig emerges, bleary-eyed, with a tray of what appears to be leftover quail and syllabub. The Georgian elite have a way of pulling everyone into their temporal orbit. When Lady Abernathy decides she wants boiled chocolate and poetry at 1:45 a.m, her entire staff becomes an unwilling constellation around her whim. One common theory for London's strange sleeping habits at the time: two-phase sleep. People didn't go to bed for one long chunk of unconsciousness. Instead, they'd sleep a few hours after dusk, wake around midnight for a couple of hours of light activity, reading, chatting, eating, and then go back to bed. It wasn't considered insomnia, it was just how nights worked. Historians still argue whether this pattern was universal across classes, or more of a romantic ideal drawn from diaries and literature. But in Georgian London, the evidence plays out before your eyes. People are up, and they're not rushing to return to bed. A little farther along you stumble upon a coffee house still buzzing. Inside, under dim chandeliers and thick plumes of pipe smoke, gentlemen argue passionately over the fate of the Spanish fleet, the proper width of a cravat, or whether pigeons can be trained to detect counterfeit coins. They can't, by the way, but don't let them know that. Coffee houses in this era are not peaceful havens of jazz music and overpriced muffins. They're more like public forums wrapped in caffeine and arrogance. Still, there's something delightful about it. The noisy hum of humanity, the scribbled pamphlets, the half-drunken wagers over breakfast timelines. You order a cup, just one. It arrives in a little pewter pot, strong enough to banish not only sleep but possibly joy. Beside it, a biscuit so hard you could use it as construction material. You dunk. It helps. Outside, the fog has thickened. Your breath curls into the air like a ghost trying to remember its lines. Somewhere nearby, a cat yowls like it's auditioning for the opera. You head toward Covent Garden, which, despite its reputation as a morning market, never truly shuts down. The flower girls have settled into corners to nap or gossip, but the fruit carts are being rolled in early by grumbling porters. Lanterns swing above them, lighting oranges like small glowing suns. And there it is again, that faint comforting clink of breakfastware. Another tavern, this one even smaller. Just one table, 3 stools, and a cook in a soot-smeared apron stirring something in a pot. You sit. No menu. The cook peers at you and mutters, "Eggs or no eggs?" You wisely choose eggs. What arrives is unidentifiable but tasty. Spiced lentils, a leftover cut of roast, and eggs scrambled with what might be leeks or might be yesterday's greens. A mystery, but a delicious one. There's something oddly intimate about eating at this hour, when even the air feels sleepy. The city has peeled off its wig, taken off its corset and let its gut hang out. This isn't the London of portraits and parliaments. It's the London of second shifts, shared pies, and whispered arguments over candlelight. And in that way, it feels truer. You stretch, yawn. And just as you're about to stand, someone bursts in, shouting about a monkey escaping from a private menagerie in Bloomsbury. You make a mental note. Investigate monkey at a more reasonable hour. But this is London, after all. Reason rarely keeps the same hours as breakfast. You leave the monkey business behind, for now, and rejoin the city's midnight murmuring. A gentle breeze pushes fog in slow waves across the cobbles, and you can't help noticing how even the mist in Georgian London feels slightly theatrical. It billows like a debutante's skirt. It hides, reveals, and softens everything. The perfect backdrop for a town that doesn't know when to quit. As you walk, your feet start to recognise the rhythm. London at this hour has a slower gait. Gone is the chaotic bustle of the market day dash. Instead, there's a sleepy, shifting choreography. A cart trundles past, pulled by a mule with more bags under its eyes than a banker. The driver, snoring, barely stirs as the mule pauses to consider a puddle, then tramps straight through it with the slow deliberation of someone who's decided they hate their job. You spot another figure up ahead, cloaked, deliberate, silent. A night soil man. You can smell him before you fully see him, and if you're smart, you step aside. His job is unglamorous but essential. Collecting human waste from privies, hauling it away in the dead of night so the city can pretend it's clean in the morning. He wears a scarf tied over his nose and a grim expression honed by years of people pretending not to see him. Still, he whistles softly, a lullaby for latrines. The farther you walk, the more you start to notice something else. People waiting, not rushing, not leaving, just pausing. 2 seamstresses in a doorway share a heel of bread. A printer's apprentice leans on a crate, reading aloud to himself under a flickering sconce. And in one particularly odd moment, a butcher's boy practices juggling with 3 sad-looking onions. This in-between time, this space between first and second sleep, is strangely roomy. And for many Londoners, it's the most private time they get all day. You wander toward the edge of Soho and into the area known for coffee houses with winks. Yes, those. Georgian brothels rarely call themselves such. They prefer euphemisms: tea houses, Turkish baths, literary salons, the usual. One establishment with red curtains and a name like the conversational Finch is still going strong. You can hear laughter through the windows and smell cheap perfume mixed with tallow. Here, pleasure keeps the clock, and breakfast might follow immediately after, depending on your stamina or your wallet. But these spaces weren't just dens of indulgence. Many of them also operated as informal salons, places where actors, playwrights, and philosophers mingled with sex workers and society's fringes, not unlike a Twitter thread with better shoes. That mingling of ideas, however tipsy, shaped politics, art, and occasionally led to duels at dawn. You lean against a lamppost and glance up. The stars finally peek through the smog like gossiping old ladies behind curtains. And then, somewhere nearby, the soft strains of music. You follow the sound. Turns out, you've stumbled upon a catch club, a group of amateur singers who gather at inns after hours to harmonise bawdy rounds. They're gathered around a long wooden table, tankards in hand, harmonising something about a fishwife and a stolen ham. The harmonies are surprisingly tight, the lyrics less so. Catch clubs were a Georgian invention, born from the strange combination of Puritan hangover and gin-soaked optimism. Anyone could join, so long as they could carry a tune and drink enough to forget the second verse. You watch for a while and someone passes you a mug without asking. It's full of something that smells like burnt apples and ambition. You take a sip. Your eyebrows rise of their own volition. It's not bad, just spirited. Next to you, a man in a velvet waistcoat tells you he's a moon geographer. You ask what that means. He shrugs and says, "Mapping parts no one sees by day." You nod solemnly, because honestly that's what the whole city feels like right now. The moon geographer, whose name is likely Jeremy, he insists it might also be Bartholomew, begins to explain how London's street lighting evolved. You weren't expecting a lecture on oil lamp subsidies, but you're oddly delighted. In the early 1700s, he says, the city was still mostly dark at night, lamps spaced too far apart, oil expensive, and the glow more decorative than helpful. By mid-century, though, things began to change. New regulations required more lamps in commercial areas, and watchmen were tasked with maintaining them. It wasn't quite Parisian gaslight elegance, but it was better than relying on the moon and good luck. Historians still argue whether this lighting revolution was driven by safety concerns or simply upper-class distaste for stumbling through gutters in silk stockings. Either way, London at night began to glow, unevenly, yes, but glow nonetheless. Jeremy, or Bartholomew, raises his tankard and toasts to artificial suns and real breakfasts. Everyone cheers. You're not entirely sure what that means, but again, it sounds like a vibe. A few verses later, the club disperses, their voices trailing off into the mist. You wander again, this time along Fleet Street, where the printing houses once clattered through the night. The presses themselves are quiet now, either done or just not begun, but the smell of ink and paper still clings to the air like gossip. In a shop window, you notice a freshly set broadsheet headlined, "Rumour of lobster found on horseback in Westminster, unconfirmed." No story yet, just a placeholder and a gleam in the printer's eye. That's the joy of Georgian tabloids. Truth was optional, but punctuation was impeccable. Fleet Street at this hour is home to ghosts of all kinds, typesetters, journalists, pamphleteers and radical thinkers. A place where information and caffeine kept company through the small hours. It's no wonder that so many political movements were born under cover of night, when the powers that be slept and the ink ran freely. You pause at a stone bench and your legs thank you for the break. The stone's cold, but the air is warm, almost drowsy now. Around you, the noises of the city begin to slow, just slightly. A sign, perhaps, that second sleep is coming soon for many, but not for everyone. Because just around the corner, a small line has begun to form outside a door marked only with the symbol of a chicken. People are arriving quietly but deliberately. Midnight supper? Not quite. It's nearly 4 a.m, and this, dear wanderer, is the earliest of breakfasts, and it smells like heaven. The scent greets you first, a warm, buttery curl of air that wafts from under the crooked wooden door of the chicken mark shop. It's not sharp like roasted meat, nor spicy like curry. It's soft and savoury, the scent of something eggy, something griddled, something promising. You're not the only one lured by it. The line has grown. Some are delivery boys just ending their routes. Others are artisans beginning early. A woman in a lace cap, probably a laundress, leans on her basket and hums quietly. Two porters talk without looking at each other, their shared silence only broken when one nods toward the door and mutters, "Hope they've got kidneys left." A minute later you step inside. The place is tiny, barely more than a room with a battered stove and a long counter scarred by years of urgent elbows. Behind it, a man in shirt sleeves slings toast onto plates like a card dealer. His face says nothing, but his frying pan says, "Hurry." This is one of London's many unofficial breakfast kitchens, open during that strange slice of pre-dawn when the pubs have gone quiet but the bakers haven't yet begun. They're not listed in the directories and they don't advertise. Their customers find them by scent, rumour and muscle memory. On the menu, kidneys on toast, eels in vinegar, eggs, often grey from overboiling, and something called bubble and squeak, which is just leftover cabbage and potatoes mashed together and fried until even a poet would call it edible. You order toast with dripping and a pot of tea so strong it should probably have a licence. When it arrives, it steams gently in the cold morning air. You sip. The tannins punch you awake and apologise afterward. Why breakfast now, you ask? Well, here's the thing. For much of Georgian London, midnight, or rather the few hours after midnight, was when breakfast made the most sense. You see, many labourers worked irregular hours. Market workers began before dawn. Night watchmen ended their shifts as the sun rose. Bakers started at 2 or 3 a.m. to be ready for the morning rush. For them, this was not a late night, it was the beginning of their day. And even among the fashionable classes, strange sleep patterns made midnight breakfast perfectly logical. The concept of first sleep and second sleep still lingered, especially in older homes and rural traditions. People would go to bed around 9 p.m, sleep a few hours, wake around midnight, read, talk, even visit neighbours, and then return to bed until morning. This nocturnal gap became the perfect time for a little meal, a light repast, a sneaky egg, and a sigh. Historians still argue whether this biphasic sleep was natural or just the result of candle economies. Some suggest that longer winter nights force people into segmented slumber. Others believe our modern single-block sleep is the unnatural state, pushed by industrial schedules and strict work hours. Either way, your current reality involves toast at 4 a.m, and frankly, that feels pretty natural right now. Across the table from you, a clerk from the Bank of England stirs his tea with alarming speed. He's clearly been up all night. His cravat is askew, his wig tucked under his arm like a small disapproving cat. "Final ledgers," he mutters. "Don't trust a ledger drawn up after midnight. Numbers start flirting with each other." You nod as if you understand, mostly because his eggs look good, and you hope he leaves some. The little breakfast shop fills and empties like a tide. Some eat in silence, others chat in low voices. Occasionally someone laughs, but it's not the boisterous laughter of taverns. This is quieter, mellow, like people rehearsing for the day ahead, trying on their social selves again. The cook flips a final slice of bread and says something about turning in once the chimney sweeps leave. It strikes you then. Even the cooks have a sleep rhythm braided through the city's strange timeline. Outside, the sky is just beginning to change. Not sunrise yet, but a fading of night's inkiness. A dull greying that reminds you of pewter teacups and the underbellies of clouds. You exit the shop, warm and slightly greasy, and decide to walk toward Covent Garden. Not for the theatres, those are silent now, but for the market stalls beginning their slow morning bloom. As you pass under a flickering gas lamp, you overhear a snippet of conversation between two well-dressed women, both wearing shawls and the kind of expressions that suggest they haven't slept but have lived. One says, "Did you see the Duchess last night? Dancing like her feet had no memory." The other replies, "She'll need vinegar on her ankles by morning." It's a compliment, probably. Georgian society was obsessed with appearances but thrived in moments of blurry humanity. That midnight sliver between control and collapse was where secrets were traded, mistakes were made, and identities got rearranged like furniture at a party. At Covent Garden, the first crates arrive with a sleepy clatter. Fishmongers unwrap slippery treasures with calloused hands. Flower sellers set up shop, blooms tight as fists in the early chill. You watch a boy carry an enormous cabbage like a royal offering. His face says he's too tired for metaphors. You stop near a stall stacked with early apples, small, imperfect, still dusty from the orchard. The seller offers you one with a nod. You bite. It's tart and it wakes your mouth faster than tea. There's a rhythm to this now. The last of the night owls fading out, the first of the day, birds blinking in. The air smells of coal smoke, bread, and river mud. A dock worker near you yawns so wide you fear he might inhale a passing goose. Best part of the day, he says. No bosses, no priests, just a man and his sandwich. You think about that. There's a kind of democratic peace in the in-between hours, before the orders come down, before the expectations pile up. In this weird, wonky time slot, everyone's just a stomach and a soul. And Georgian London, for all its grime and chaos, understood that. It made room, quietly, awkwardly, for people to eat at midnight, to laugh in brothels, to sleep in 2 acts, and to greet the dawn with eel pie and weary optimism. You take another bite of apple. Somewhere nearby a bell chimes. Not a grand one. Just a little clang from a delivery cart as it bumps over a cobblestone. But it's enough. Time is shifting again, and you, full of toast and time, shift with it. The streets are soft with fog again. You feel it cling to your coat, to your eyelashes, to the quiet corners of your mind. London before sunrise is a hush, a city exhaling in the moments before it inhales the noise of morning. As you drift past Somerset House, you see a milkmaid unloading tin canisters from a cart. Each clang is sharp in the mist, but oddly soothing, like someone tuning a sleepy orchestra made of breakfast ingredients. Her cheeks are pink from the cold, and she whistles something tuneless as she works. A lullaby for cows, maybe. You're headed east toward the quieter residential alleys where the Georgian elite once napped behind silk curtains and heavy velvet. But right now, no one is napping. It's too early for sleep, too late for parties. That strange gap again, the hinge between days. And what fills that hinge in the posher neighbourhoods? Something you might not expect. Breakfast balls. Yes, really. Midnight breakfasts, especially among the wealthier circles, weren't always bleary solo affairs. They could be elegant, absurdly dressed, candlelit social events. Think ball gowns, powdered wigs, harpsichord music, and kidneys on toast. The upper crust of Georgian London had an unquenchable thirst for novelty, and meals at strange hours became a fashionable indulgence. After a long evening of dancing, gambling, or simply surviving the intense social scrutiny of a drawing room, the idea of a surprise midnight breakfast seemed just rebellious enough to be thrilling. You arrive at a townhouse still glowing faintly from its upper windows. A servant is snuffing out the last of the hallway candles, but the smell of sugar and brandy lingers in the air. The butler, half asleep, all waistcoat, lets you peek into the dining room. There's a haze of perfume and burnt crusts. You imagine what the scene looked like hours ago. Tables groaning under pastries and cold meats. Bottles of fortified wine scattered like chess pieces after a scandalous game. Someone probably tried to recite Latin poetry while standing on a chair. Someone else likely fell asleep in the pudding. The fashion for breakfast balls reached its peak around the 1790s. Guests would attend masquerade balls, sometimes starting as late as 10 p.m, and continue the festivities with a full breakfast served sometime between 2 and 5 in the morning. Trays of eggs, hams, cheeses, and even hot chocolate would be laid out, alongside more theatrical options like game pies shaped like animals, or jellies that wobbled with indecent enthusiasm. Anecdotal letters from the time described breakfast at Lady Devonshire's as a midnight feast with more diamonds than cents, while others noted the culinary eccentricity of her rival, Lady Jersey, who once served oyster porridge in a garden pavilion, illuminated by candlelight and confusion. Historians still argue whether these lavish meals were sincere celebrations of the new day, or a sort of protest against the constraints of normal routine. Some argue the aristocracy just liked to show they didn't have to obey sunrise. Others think it was simply a good excuse to keep drinking. You wouldn't blame them. It's hard to go to bed when your wig weighs 4 pounds and your blood is half Madeira. As you imagine the powdered dancers eating pickled fish in full costume, you wander toward an alley not far from Bow Street. The air is different here, fresher somehow, though it still carries the faint hint of horse. You come across a vendor setting up a mobile oyster stall. It's little more than a wooden plank balanced on barrels, but the oysters glisten in the lantern light like wet coins. And yes, oysters for breakfast were absolutely a thing. They were cheap, common, and eaten by all classes. For the working poor, they were sold in pints and gulped down with vinegar or mustard. For the wealthy, they were arranged on porcelain and possibly judged for their conversational skills. The oysterman grins at you, missing several teeth but none of his charm. Fresh from Colchester, my sweet. Good for the blood. Better than a doctor. You're not entirely sure that's accurate, but you take one anyway. Cold, briny, and slightly metallic. It wakes your mouth like a slap from Neptune himself. As you chew, you watch a pair of footmen stumble out of a side door, each holding what appears to be a wedge of cold pie and a shared secret. Their coats are askew, but their laughter is sincere. One says, "If Lady Worthing thinks I'm polishing her silver now, she can kiss my aspic." You've heard worse threats. As the upper crust headed home from their balls and breakfasts, the city's daily machinery began to crank up. Lamplighters extinguished their flames with long, graceful rods. Newsboys sorted ink-smudged sheets behind coffee houses. Bakers opened shutters, and the smell, that smell of fresh bread began to rise. That scent is your next destination. You follow your nose to a bakehouse tucked near a chapel. The windows are fogged with heat, and inside the bakers move like ghosts in flowery coats. They're shaping loaves, not with urgency, but with reverence. The dough yields and springs under their fingers like something alive. One baker catches your eye and offers a nod. Without speaking, he hands you the end of a warm crust. A baker's privilege. You bite in. It's smoky, chewy, slightly sour. In a city where meat was often questionable, bread was sacred. Even poor families would stretch for the finest loaf they could afford. Bakers often worked from midnight to midday, sleeping in brief spells between mixing, proofing, and feeding monstrous ovens with wood and sweat. One baker, somewhere in Shoreditch, even kept a parrot trained to shout, "Too long, you dolt!" if a loaf burned. Historians still argue whether this was clever training or just a particularly judgmental bird. You smile at the image. By now the skies are soft pewter. The fog hasn't lifted, but it's thinner, revealing silhouettes of rooftops and chimneys like puppets in a paper play. You lean against a post and watch the street begin to stretch and yawn. A chimney sweep whistles past, soot in his hair and a pastry in his mouth. A widow walks briskly, her veil fluttering like a crow. Two boys throw a lump of something unidentifiable at each other and cackle when it explodes. And as you breathe in the smell of bread, coal, fog, and possibility, you realize you've had breakfast at midnight, wandered through revels and routines, and now you stand on the cusp of another Georgian morning. The city is waking, but you're floating, full of oysters, gossip, and half-sleep, perfectly out of sync, perfectly in place. The first sunbeams are timid, as if they've heard rumours about Georgian London and are unsure whether to proceed. They slant gently across your path, gilding the puddles, turning soot into starlight. You pull your coat tighter and head north, away from the gasping rhythm of central streets, toward quieter quarters where gentlefolk keep curious habits. Your destination this morning is a parlour not known for tea or cards, but for something rather more intoxicating: midnight cocoa. Chocolate, you see, had become all the rage in London's high society, but not the kind you might imagine, swirled with whipped cream and childhood nostalgia. No, this was chocolate brewed thick and dark, spiced with cinnamon or chili, and served with the solemnity of communion wine. At this hour, the chocolate houses are either closing down or turning secretive. You step through a side door, hidden behind an apothecary's facade, and find yourself in a low-lit room lined with velvet benches. A fire purrs in the hearth. The scent is deep and heady. Cocoa, cloves, burnt sugar. You sit. A woman in pale blue silk, her wig askew from slumber or sabotage, offers you a smile and a porcelain cup. "Careful," she whispers, "the cinnamon bites." You sip, and she's not wrong. The drink is molten, mysterious, both a lullaby and a dare. This isn't just a trendy indulgence. Chocolate was, for many, a kind of midnight medicine. Georgian physicians prescribed it to soothe nerves, stimulate digestion, or reinvigorate the humours. Some even claimed it warded off melancholia, although historians still argue whether this belief was genuine or just clever marketing by colonial importers. In any case, a steaming cup of spiced chocolate was an acceptable reason to gather at unseemly hours, especially among women. Female friendships often bloomed over these midnight cups, shared away from husbands, gossips, and glaring daylight. You overhear fragments of conversation. And then she actually fainted into the blancmange. If the footman wears that wig again, I swear I'll tie it to a goose. Lord Pelham's canary is learning Italian. You linger in the warmth, letting the drink settle into your bones. But outside, a new rhythm is beginning to pick up. The clatter of hooves, the bark of street hawkers, the dull roar of a city at the edge of full wakefulness. So you leave the parlour and wind your way toward Covent Garden, where night and morning argue most convincingly. By this time of day, somewhere between 5 and 6, the market is already bustling. Torches and lanterns flicker across barrels of apples, baskets of greens, and pyramids of oranges shipped in from Spain. The vendors shout with tired voices, not quite awake, not quite asleep. One woman, elbows deep in a pile of lettuces, is singing softly in Welsh. Another man with an eye patch is slicing turnips with theatrical flair. A child, barefoot, yawning, attempts to balance a cabbage on his head while hopping. You silently rate his performance, 6.5, but you're here for a different kind of breakfast, a working class kind. You find it sizzling on a street corner, fried eel. Now, if your stomach just made a polite attempt to exit your body, take comfort. Fried eel was not only popular in Georgian London, it was beloved. Cheap, plentiful, and surprisingly resilient to poor sanitation, eels were the breakfast of dock workers, chimney sweeps, and anyone too practical to care what their food looked like before it was fried. The vendor skewers a piece for you. It's crispy, smoky, and you have to admit, oddly comforting. A bit like someone deep-fried ambition and sprinkled it with pepper. As you eat, a man sidles up next to you and orders 2. He's in a butcher's apron, and his beard is frosted with what might be flour or possibly powdered regret. He winks at you. Cures what ails you, or at least makes you forget what ails you. There's wisdom in that. Eels weren't just popular, they were infrastructure. London's eel pie shops operated around the clock. Many were open 24 hours, providing food to everyone from stable boys to socialites recovering from late-night indiscretions. The city consumed thousands of tons annually, most imported from the Thames estuary or even the Netherlands. They were pickled, jellied, grilled, or, as you just discovered, fried with questionable enthusiasm. In fact, historians still argue whether the eel obsession came from its taste, its affordability, or simply because other fish wouldn't survive London's water. Whatever the reason, you finish your skewer with a strange sense of satisfaction. It tastes like history, slightly rubbery history. You wander now toward a small churchyard, where an old man in a tricorn hat is playing a hurdy-gurdy. The notes wheel out like slow cartwheels, slightly off-key but gentle. A cat is sleeping on his coat. The man doesn't seem to mind. There's a stillness here, briefly. The city hasn't quite noticed the time. It's during this moment of pause that you remember something curious. Not everyone in Georgian London ate breakfast. Some fasted until midday, others drank ale instead. And a rare few, especially among the more eccentric, ate breakfast consisting solely of fruit, vinegar water, or even raw eggs stirred into coffee. One particularly colourful figure, Sir Augustus Cartwright, reportedly began each day with a single fig, a Latin prayer, and 3 spoonfuls of marmalade eaten while facing due east. His neighbours thought him mad. He thought them digestively uninspired. You wonder what happened to him. Probably exploded from citrus. The light shifts again, this time golden. The city is officially awake now. Chimneys belch with confidence. The last dancers have gone home. The eel vendor packs up. And you? You begin to walk again. 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in a puddle. It's time to explore how the less fortunate greeted their mornings. Because while the upper class sipped chocolate in silk, the working poor had their own midnight rituals. Less refined, perhaps, but no less meaningful. You round a corner and find a queue forming near a soup kitchen. Steam curls into the cold air. Children huddle in shawls. An old woman clutches a cracked teacup like a relic. You hear someone murmur, "Best we get it now, gone by sunrise yesterday." This is the other London, and it too wakes hungry. The queue near the soup kitchen stretches longer than you'd expect for this hour. There's a quiet dignity to it, no shoving, no shouting, just the gentle shuffle of cold feet and the occasional cough. You're in Spitalfields now, where Georgian London's working poor have already been up for hours, not because of some whimsical appetite for midnight eel or velvet-draped chocolate salons, but because their lives demand it. Sleep for many here is a luxury rationed like sugar or soap. The smell drifting from the soup line is indeterminate. A bit of barley maybe, cabbage, possibly hope. It's being ladled by a stern woman in a grey shawl and a hat that resembles a small haystack. You nod to her as you pass, and she nods back, tight-lipped but not unkind. The recipients sit wherever they can. Some cradle their bowls under the flickering gas lamps, others sip in silence against brick walls. One young man, his face marked with coal dust, gestures toward his soup and says with dry cheer, "It's pigeon," they said, or what used to live near a pigeon. You both laugh softly. It's enough. This side of the city wakes differently. Here, breakfast isn't eaten in hushed candlelight. It's gulped, wrapped in old newspaper, and chased with a crust of yesterday's bread. Yet there is community, the kind born from shared hardship. Someone always brings an extra tin cup. Someone else offers a seat, a shawl, a hand. You slip into the side streets, winding through alleys where children chalk rude drawings on brick walls, and laundry drips from windows like surrender flags. A lamplighter walks past you, snuffing out the last gas lamps now that dawn has officially decided to commit. You tip your hat. He nods, another member of the invisible workforce that keeps London humming through the hours everyone else pretends don't exist. Soon, you arrive at a curious little corner of the city where the clock seems especially confused. This is the realm of the nightmen. The name sounds grand, perhaps even romantic. It is not. Nightmen were responsible for one of Georgian London's least glamorous, most essential tasks, emptying cesspits. Human waste was collected in underground tanks below homes and buildings, and when those tanks filled up, as they inevitably did, someone had to haul it all away. That someone was usually a team of nightmen. You pause near a brick courtyard where a crew is at work. The air is ripe, the tools crude, long-handled scoops, ropes, barrels. Their lanterns swing like uneasy planets, casting warped shadows across the walls. One man whistles while he works, another mutters in rhyming curses. They move with practiced efficiency, tossing buckets of night soil into a waiting cart drawn by a rather displeased mule. You don't stay long, but as you walk away, it strikes you. The nightmen were part of the strange ecosystem of Georgian London's sleep schedule. They worked while others slept, slipped away before polite society stirred and were barely acknowledged, unless something overflowed. Historians still argue whether nightmen were tolerated with respect or merely endured with a clothespin over the nose. Either way, their breakfast, when they finally ate it, probably involved a very long wash and the strongest gin available. Speaking of which, by now the gin shops are starting to open. You find one tucked into a former cobbler's shop, the sign above the door swinging lazily in the breeze, the lazy heel, subtle. Inside, the floorboards creak like guilty consciences, and the smell of juniper berries wrestles with the scent of yesterday's cigar smoke. Gin in Georgian London was more than a drink. It was a coping mechanism, a status symbol, and a public menace, all depending on whom you asked. Originally promoted as a medicinal tonic, it rapidly became the cheapest route to temporary oblivion. By the 1730s, it was blamed for everything from rising crime to moral decay, to babies being misplaced. You sidle up to the counter. The woman pouring drinks looks like she hasn't blinked since Tuesday. She slides you a tiny glass without a word. You sip. It burns. It tastes like regret aged in a barrel of disappointment, with a citrusy finish. Still, for many Londoners, especially the poor, gin was breakfast, or at least a necessary prelude to it. And it wasn't just drunk from dainty glasses. It was infused into porridge, baked into buns, even stirred into soup. The phrase, drinking yourself to breakfast, wasn't entirely metaphorical. This particular gin shop is unusually lively for a new morning. A man is attempting to juggle pickled eggs. A woman with a laugh like a crow on a washboard is regaling her neighbour with a story involving a chimney sweep, a goose, and someone named Reginald. You catch only fragments. That's probably for the best. But not all early risers sought escape. Some leaned into their eccentricity with scholarly rigour, and for that you'll need to visit a gentleman known simply as the Egg Philosopher. No one remembers his real name, but sometime in the 1770s he made it his life's mission to perfect the art of boiling an egg. Every morning at precisely 4:17 a.m, he had a dedicated fire built in his garden, a special iron stand to suspend the pot exactly 2 inches above the flame, and a water clock to measure the seconds. He believed the optimal egg required precisely 186.5 seconds of heat, not a moment more. His neighbours initially mocked him. Later they began timing their own routines by the steam rising from his garden wall. It became a sort of local ritual. The egg philosopher's fire is lit, best get to market. You smile, imagining him now, dressing gown flapping in the breeze, eyebrow arched at an imprecise yolk. His breakfast surely was a work of art. Of course, not all eccentric breakfasts were noble. One pamphlet from the time described a woman known for eating cold oysters at dawn, washed down with laudanum and vinegar. Her reasoning? It prevents the vapours. Historians still argue whether this was true medical advice or just a particularly pungent hangover cure. By now the sun is fully risen, and the city is starting to behave like it knows the rules again. The streets are louder, the bakery lines longer, the milkmaids calling out with polished cheer. You've walked from midnight cocoa to eel skewers to pickled gin-soaked misadventures, and returned, finally, to the border of respectability. London has survived another night, so have you, but there's still much more to see. The Thames greets you like an old friend who's always slightly damp. You're near Billingsgate now, London's famed fish market, where the day doesn't so much begin as lurch into being with the graceless splash of a cod hitting a slab of stone. It's just past 6 a.m, but the place has already been roaring for hours. You spot porters weaving through the crowd with baskets balanced on their heads, their steps oddly graceful considering they're carting halibut the size of carriage wheels. There's a certain poetry to the noise, a fishmonger's shout blending with the cries of gulls, the slap of wet soles on slick cobbles, the laughter of someone who's clearly forgotten to go home since yesterday. It's not the breakfast ambience you're used to, perhaps, but it has its own salt and vinegar charm. Here, in the deep, fishy bowels of the riverside economy, Georgian Londoners came to find breakfast that still twitched. Smoked kippers, wriggling eels, salt cod, pickled herring, and for the brave, raw oysters by the dozen. That last one, by the way, wasn't the luxury it is now. Oysters were dirt cheap in the 18th century. They were street food, the kind of thing you slurp down while arguing about taxes or watching a public hanging. One boy, no older than 10, is hawking a tin pail of cockles with the gusto of a merchant prince. "Fresh as your mother's breath," he cries. A nearby woman scowls. He doesn't flinch. He's probably made more coin than you today. The dockside air is thick with brine, and you swear you can smell seaweed even though you haven't seen a single proper wave. But that's the trick of the Thames. It smells more like memory than water. You weave through the crowd, past a burly man haggling over a haddock and a couple huddled over a shared kipper, eating with their fingers. Behind them, a scribbler sits with a journal, trying to write something poetic about the scent of mackerel. Poor soul. Some smells defy metaphor. But here's the surprising bit, some of the most high-born folk in town came here too. Not to rub elbows with the mongers, heavens no, but to get the freshest catch for their own absurdly early meals. Georgian aristocrats were notorious for their midnight to dawn feasts, and what better status symbol than a slab of pike straight from the river, steamed with herbs and served by candlelight. They sent their footmen in the wee hours, often before the sky began its reluctant shift from ash to lavender. These liveried servants would jostle among the fishwives and street boys, tasked with securing the perfect turbot for Lord So-and-so's 2 a.m. tea. Some of these servants became minor celebrities in their own right. One was known only as Haddock Harry, and claimed to be able to identify any fish by smell alone. He once stopped a nobleman's dinner mid-course, having caught a whiff of yesterday's trout being passed off as fresh. Historians still argue whether Harry was fired for insubordination or promoted for his nostrils. You pass an alley where the detritus of the early fish rush clogs the gutters. Scales, bones, fish paper, lemon peels. Someone's cat is having the breakfast of its life. Up the hill now, where the air begins to shift from damp salt to warm sugar. You're approaching Cheapside, where the bakers have been at it since before even the eels stirred. The scent hits you like a lullaby wrapped in cinnamon. Bread, fresh from the oven, crusts cracking, steam curling through keyholes and into the dreams of every sleep-starved Londoner. Here, the definition of breakfast gets a bit more familiar. You pass shops selling honeyed rolls, currant buns, sugar biscuits shaped like animals, and the Georgian classic, hot cross buns. Not just for Good Friday anymore, thank you very much. One shop window displays a pyramid of saffron buns with a sign that reads, "Guaranteed to keep the vapours at bay." A bold claim, possibly illegal. You step into a bakery with soot-darkened windows and counters warm to the touch. Behind them, An elderly woman named Mrs. Grimbles fusses over a tray of burnt-bottomed pastries like they're royal infants. She offers you one on account of your shoes, which are apparently too clean for someone respectable. You take it gratefully. It tastes like cloves and something you can't quite place. Possibly fennel, possibly hope. But even here in this carb-scented sanctuary, the hour betrays its strangeness. You notice a clock above the hearth reads 6:45, but outside a courier sprints by yelling, "Noon delivery!" One of the bakers mutters, "Must be a playwright." You don't ask. Because here's the thing about time in Georgian London, it wasn't fixed. Clocks varied wildly, and so did personal schedules. Midnight might be breakfast for a surgeon on graveyard shift. 6 a.m. could be dinner for a midwife just finishing her 5th delivery. Everyone kept time according to need, not nicety. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for entire households to operate on shifted rhythms. Some of the city's newspaper editors ran press rooms that buzzed between 2 and 10 a.m., printing the morning broadsheets by lantern light while the rest of the city slumbered or supped. These schedules bred entire cultures within cultures: night book clubs, midnight philosophy societies, even 3 a.m. salons, where poets recited odes to moonlight and gout remedies by candlelight. You once heard of a chess club that met only between 4 and 6 a.m., allegedly to sharpen the mind at its weakest point. Historians still debate whether these were genuine intellectual gatherings, or just elaborate excuses to dodge wives and creditors. But the reality remains. Georgian London had a curious elasticity to it. Time bent around work, status, weather and whim. You didn't eat breakfast at dawn because it was healthy. You did it because your boss was a night owl with gout and a passion for mackerel pâté. You exit the bakery with a warm roll tucked in your coat and head toward Covent Garden. The sky is pale gold now, and the city feels like it's waking up for real, even though you've been awake for what feels like a week. You pass a boy yawning into a pail of milk, a girl dragging a sack of coal, and a gentleman trying to light a pipe with a candle that keeps going out in the breeze. He curses under his breath. You keep walking. Soon you'll enter a world of flowers and fruit where breakfast is perfumed, not pickled. But for now, you savour this moment. The half-light, the warm roll, the curious certainty that Georgian London is, against all logic, beginning to make a strange sort of sleepy sense. The bustle of Covent Garden unfolds before you like a softly whispered secret in the early morning light. The market hall, with its elegant ironwork and glass panels, captures the pale gold of dawn, letting sunbeams scatter through the dust that floats lazily in the still air. The scent here is a curious mingling of fresh flowers, ripe fruit, and the faintest traces of last night's spilled ale, a complex perfume that somehow soothes and awakens at once. Covent Garden, in Georgian London, was much more than just a market. It was a stage where all classes mingled, though rarely on equal terms, and where commerce and culture collided in a constant hum of life. Here, the flower sellers arranged their bouquets with painstaking care, fruit vendors shouted their wares in lilting accents, and street performers wove their acts between the crowds, their music and laughter threading through the chatter. You wander past stalls bursting with cherries so red they almost glow, apricots soft as summer sunsets, and melons that promise juicy sweetness beneath their thick rinds. Some fruits glisten with dew, still cool from the night's mist, while others have already warmed to the touch of the morning sun. The vendors call out with theatrical flair, their voices lifting and falling like a gentle song designed to lure customers closer. Ripe as a summer's secret, sweet as a whispered lie, one shouts, grinning at his own poetry. You can't help but smile back. Salesmanship here is as much art as it is business. Breakfast in this part of London has a softness that contrasts with the salted and smoked offerings of the docks or the hearty fare in the taverns. Here, mornings are often sweet and delicate, filled with fruit tarts, honey-dipped rolls, and bowls of berries steeped in cream. It's a luxury enjoyed mainly by those with the time and means to savour it, a world away from the hard-bitten fishmongers and their briny early meals. You overhear two women nearby debating the merits of pineapples, an exotic rarity that had only recently become more accessible thanks to Britain's expanding colonial reach. One insists the pineapple is nature's crown jewel, a treasure fit for kings and queens alike, while the other argues that it tastes like sunshine trapped in a prickly prison. A poetic yet slightly suspect description. It's a light-hearted quarrel that underscores just how much these fruits were objects of fascination, status, and sometimes confusion. At a nearby flower stall, an elderly man arranges lilacs, lavender and jasmine into fragrant bouquets. He leans toward a curious child and whispers that certain flowers are breakfast for the soul, a phrase that seems both whimsical and sincere. Lavender water, he explains, was a morning tonic believed to soothe nerves and protect against the so-called melancholy vapours that plagued city dwellers. Whether such floral remedies truly calmed the spirit or were simply comforting rituals remains a subject of scholarly debate, with historians still divided on the effectiveness versus the placebo power of these fragrant elixirs. Near the heart of the market, a troupe of street performers entertains a growing crowd. Their juggling pins gleam in the early sunlight as they toss oranges and flaming torches, their laughter bubbling through the crisp air. One performer spins a fanciful tale of a fruit so rare and magical it could only be found in the Garden of Eden itself. The story, likely exaggerated, enchants children and adults alike, reminding you that in Georgian London, entertainment was as essential as sustenance. Suddenly, a shout cuts through the din. A fruit cart has tipped over, sending peaches and plums tumbling across the cobblestones. The vendor curses softly, but the commotion quickly turns to laughter as children rush in to gather the fallen fruit, their delight evident despite the minor disaster. It's a vivid reminder that even the most orderly of mornings can be touched by chaos and joy alike. You drift toward a small tea shop tucked between two bustling stalls. Its sign, painted in curling script, reads The Morning Lotus. Inside, patrons sip delicate brews of green and black teas, sometimes infused with soothing herbs like chamomile, mint, or rose petals. Tea, a relatively recent import in Georgian London, was fast becoming a morning staple, especially among the city's middle and upper classes who embraced it not only for its flavour, but for the ritual it entailed. Settling into a quiet corner with a steaming cup of lavender-infused Earl Grey, you feel the warmth seep into your fingers, calming the racing thoughts and restless muscles. Tea here is more than a beverage. It is a social ceremony, a gentle way to greet the day. The swirling steam carries faint hints of bergamot and honey, promising comfort in a cup. An intriguing detail catches your ear. Tea was often sweetened with honey or milk, but the order of adding these ingredients sparked frequent debate. Some argued that adding milk first protected delicate porcelain cups from cracking under the heat, while others insisted milk should come last to preserve the tea's nuanced flavours. Historians still debate which practice truly prevailed and when this culinary quarrel began, reflecting broader tensions between tradition and innovation in Georgian society. Outside, the market's gentle chaos continues. A lute player tunes his strings, preparing for the day's serenades, while merchants haggle over prices and buyers inspect goods with careful eyes. The mingling sounds, the clatter of wooden carts, the murmur of haggling, the occasional burst of laughter, form a soothing backdrop like a lullaby of city life. You reflect on the curious elasticity of time in Georgian London. Here, the day was not marked by a rigid clock, but by the rhythms of work, weather, and whimsy. Breakfast times varied wildly depending on social status, profession, and even personal preference. Surgeons on night shifts might eat while others slept. Midwives often dined between deliveries, and aristocrats kept secret hours to accommodate their nocturnal indulgences. This fluidity created unique subcultures within the city. Night book clubs where ideas flourished in candlelight, midnight salons where poets recited verses to the moon, and chess clubs that met at the oddest hours to sharpen minds during their weakest moments. Historians continue to debate whether these gatherings were serious intellectual endeavours or merely clever excuses for sociability away from prying eyes. With your cup empty and the market's vibrant life pulsing around you, you prepare to move on, carrying with you the soft sweetness of morning fruit and tea, the hum of human activity, and the realization that in Georgian London, breakfast was never simply a meal. It was a portal into a world shaped by time's flexible hand and the city's endlessly surprising rhythms. The morning sun climbs higher, casting a warm glow over the quieter, more refined streets of Bloomsbury, where Georgian London's intellectual and artistic souls gather away from the chaos of the markets. You find yourself wandering along tidy squares framed by elegant townhouses, their wrought iron railings entwined with climbing ivy and window boxes bursting with fresh blooms. This part of the city feels like a breath of fresh air compared to the noisy bustle of Covent Garden, a place where minds meet as often as hands exchange goods. You enter a well-known coffee house, a sanctuary for the curious and the learned. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans mingles with the soft flicker of beeswax candles, their amber light casting gentle shadows on walls lined with towering shelves of leather-bound books. The air buzzes softly with the murmurs of patrons deep in thought or engaged in animated yet respectful debate. You take a seat in a worn leather armchair, sinking into its comforting embrace as the hum of ideas swirls around you like a gentle fog. Coffee houses in Georgian London were far more than mere places to drink a hot beverage. They were vibrant hubs of social life, intellectual exchange and political discourse. Known affectionately as penny universities for the modest price of admission, just a penny for a cup of coffee, these establishments offered access to knowledge and conversation to a broad swathe of the population. From tradesmen to aristocrats, writers to philosophers, the coffee house welcomed all who sought to engage with the world's ideas. Yet, historians still debate how democratic these spaces truly were, considering the social distinctions that still played out within their walls. Nearby, you overhear a conversation about mourning jewellery, a custom that has caught your attention. Intricately crafted lockets and rings set with black enamel or woven locks of hair were worn as sentimental tokens to commemorate loved ones who had passed away. This practice reveals the era's complex relationship with death, grief made tangible through delicate art. You wonder about the stories behind each piece, whose memory they preserved, what silent sorrows they carried. These small, intimate objects served as private rituals of remembrance amid a society that was publicly restrained in its expressions of mourning. Your attention shifts back to the coffee in your hand, a dark, rich brew with subtle floral notes and a whisper of bitterness. Drinking coffee in Georgian London was surrounded by delicate etiquette. Slurping was a no-no, as was rushing through the cup. The ideal was to savour it slowly, at a gentle warmth that neither scalded the tongue nor dulled the flavours. This ritualised enjoyment mirrored the intellectual atmosphere of the coffee house itself, where thoughtful deliberation was prized above all. From across the room, a gentleman reads aloud from a newly published volume of poetry. His voice is steady and clear, casting a soothing spell over the listeners. The words, illuminated by candlelight, drift through the space like a tender caress, creating a momentary escape from the outside world. You lean back, letting the melody of language wash over you, imagining yourself transported to distant lands and forgotten times. Reflecting on coffee's journey to London, you think about its origins in the Ottoman Empire and how it travelled along intricate trade routes, bringing with it not only a new drink but also a new way of socialising and thinking. Some early critics branded it the bitter invention of Satan, fearing its stimulating effects on the body and mind, while others embraced it as a vital source of energy and creativity, fueling the debates and discoveries that shaped the era. Outside the window, life continues at its relentless pace. Horse-drawn carriages clatter along the cobblestones, footmen in powdered wigs rush errands, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifts up from a nearby bakery. The city hums with a rhythm that never quite rests, a constant dance between tradition and change. Back inside, the conversation turns to remedies for one of the city's common ailments, insomnia. A gentleman describes a recently popular cure involving a blend of valerian root and lavender oil, herbs believed to soothe restless minds and ease troubled sleep. Sleeplessness was widely experienced in Georgian London, with its noisy streets, flickering candlelight, and the pressures of urban life. Remedies ranged from the herbal and natural to the more peculiar and mechanical. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these treatments, and whether insomnia was seen purely as a medical issue, a spiritual imbalance, or a byproduct of the city's fast-changing environment. Your cup now empty, you feel a comforting warmth lingering in your chest, the combination of caffeine and calm conversation settling your thoughts. The coffee house, with its quiet rituals and gentle hum of ideas, offers a peaceful pause from the city's ceaseless motion. As you rise to leave, slipping a few coins onto the polished wooden table, you take one last look around at the faces absorbed in books, in discussion, in quiet contemplation. The coffee house is a microcosm of Georgian London itself, a place where the old and new coexist, where curiosity and tradition meet in a dance as intricate as any courtly ball. Stepping back out into the daylight, you feel ready to continue your journey through this fascinating city. The streets of Bloomsbury beckon, promising more stories woven from the threads of daily life, of hidden rituals, and the unexpected ways people shaped their worlds. The morning continues to unfold gently around you, a series of small moments strung together like pearls, each one a quiet revelation, a tender echo of the past. And as you move forward, you carry with you the soft murmur of history whispering in your ear, inviting you to listen closely to the rhythms of Georgian London. The rhythmic click-clack of your footsteps on the cobblestone streets leads you away from the calm elegance of Bloomsbury's garden squares and deeper into the bustling winding lanes of Georgian London. The air here hums with a liveliness that feels almost tangible, a mix of horse-drawn carts rattling over stone, the distant cries of street vendors hawking their wares, and the murmur of townsfolk exchanging news and gossip. You navigate past narrow alleys flanked by timber-framed houses and small shops, each exuding its own distinctive charm and hinting at stories waiting just beneath their weathered facades. Eventually you find yourself standing before a rather unassuming building, its heavy wooden door slightly ajar, inviting you inside. This is no ordinary house, but rather one of the city's public bathhouses, a space where cleanliness, community and curiosity merge beneath thick walls steamed with warmth and whispered conversations. You step across the threshold and are immediately greeted by a surge of warm, moist air, rich with the mingling scents of lavender, rosemary and faint traces of soap. The heat embraces you like a gentle wave, a stark contrast to the often damp and chilly streets outside. Public baths in Georgian London occupied a curious place in the social fabric of the city. Though private bathing was an option for the wealthiest, most Londoners relied on these communal spaces not merely for hygiene but for moments of social reprieve. The bathhouse was a destination for relaxation, for meeting friends, and occasionally for discreet business dealings. It functioned as a microcosm of the city itself, full of energy, chatter, and subtle rituals that made it feel less like a utilitarian space and more like a sanctuary from the relentless pace of urban life. You observe the layout carefully. Wooden benches line the walls, polished smooth by years of use, while heavy velvet curtains hang between small bathing cubicles, offering a measure of privacy without breaking the communal atmosphere. The tiled floors glisten under flickering candlelight, and the occasional splash of water echoes softly. Patrons, men and women typically bathing separately, move through the space with practiced ease, slipping into pools of warm water that steam gently in the cool air. Some soak silently, eyes closed, perhaps meditating on the day's troubles. Others engage in lively conversation, their voices low and comforting. The water itself is a marvel. Some bathhouses have tapped into heated natural springs, while others use vast kettles warmed by coal fires to fill the pools. The knowledge of hygiene and disease transmission is limited in this period, so the bath's cleanliness varied widely. Historians continue to debate the healthiness of these public bathing practices, wondering whether the close quarters and shared water did more harm than good. Still, the appeal of the ritual is undeniable. The soothing sensation of warm water enveloping the body, the calming effects of fragrant herbal infusions, and the social joy of shared experience. You notice that many bathers have brought their own aromatic oils and herbs to enhance their soak. Lavender, well known for its relaxing qualities, mingles with rosemary's invigorating scent, and occasionally more exotic aromas like musk or ambergris subtly perfume the air. These fragrances served a practical purpose too, masking less pleasant odours in a city where sanitation was often a challenge. Some bathhouse clients even believed these scents carried therapeutic properties, boosting mood, aiding circulation, or quietly encouraging romantic encounters. Whether true or folklore, these sensory elements add a layer of intimacy to the bathing ritual that feels surprisingly modern. Looking around, you sense that the bathhouse is also a hub of social interaction, a place where the usual formalities of class and profession soften in the steam-filled air. Women gather in the afternoon, sharing whispered gossip, exchanging remedies for ailments, or simply enjoying a rare break from their household duties. Meanwhile, men might discuss politics, business, or literature in quieter corners. The atmosphere, though communal, allows for private connections, a gentle dance of proximity and discretion. You overhear murmurs about a recent scandal involving a well-known politician allegedly seen at the baths with a mysterious companion. Stories like these spread quickly, adding an element of intrigue to the otherwise serene environment, in stark contrast to the quiet intellectual salons and coffeehouses of Bloomsbury. The public baths pulse with a raw vitality that reminds you how varied the social spaces of Georgian London truly were. Yet, beneath their surface differences, these places share a common thread. They offer respite and renewal from the demands of city life. Whether through the warmth of a freshly brewed cup of coffee or the soothing embrace of steamy water, Georgians found ways to care for both body and spirit. As you prepare to leave this soothing haven, your eyes catch an ornate wooden sign near the exit. Its elegant script lists the prices for various services: a simple wash, a soak in a medicinal herbal bath, or even massage treatments available for those who can afford a little luxury. The notion of paying to be clean might feel odd today, but in this time it was both a practical necessity and a subtle marker of social status. Access to these facilities, while widespread, still varied with one's means and connections. Stepping back onto the street, the cool London air immediately feels brisk and refreshing. The city's cacophony, the clip of hooves, the shouts of market sellers, the distant ringing of church bells, rushes back in, filling your senses with its vibrant, chaotic melody. You take a deep breath, feeling somehow lighter, as though the warm bath has cleansed not just your skin but your very spirit. The story of Georgian London continues to unfold around you, a rich tapestry woven from countless such moments of quiet grace amid the city's relentless energy. You realise that these public baths were more than just places to wash. They were spaces where the city's inhabitants could pause, reflect and connect, an essential thread in the complex social fabric of 18th century London. Their legacy, though often overlooked, reveals much about how people of the past sought comfort and companionship in an era before modern conveniences. And as you move on, the memory of steam rising gently in the glow of candlelight stays with you, a small, warm beacon in the sprawling, ever-changing story of this remarkable city. As the sun dips below the horizon, the bustling clamour of Georgian London's daytime activity softens, and the city slips quietly into night. You step outside once more, your footsteps echoing gently on the cobblestones beneath a gradually darkening sky. The familiar noises of merchants calling their wares and children playing in the street give way to a subtler, more intimate soundscape. The distant clip of horse hooves, the soft rustle of cloaks brushing against walls, and the occasional bark of a dog. The gas lamps along the street sputter to life, casting warm, golden pools of light that flicker against the damp stones, their feeble glow barely cutting through the encroaching shadows. You find yourself drawn into one of the city's more curious customs, the practice of night walking. It's a tradition both ordinary and extraordinary, embraced by Londoners from all walks of life, from labourers to merchants, from lonely widows to youthful lovers. Night walking is not merely a necessity for those working odd hours or returning late from taverns. It's a subtle cultural ritual, a way to engage with the city's unique nighttime character. Imagine slipping silently into the cool night air, the smell of wood smoke mingling with the damp earthiness of London streets. Your breath forms small clouds in the chill as you step carefully past shuttered windows and closed shop fronts. The usual daytime throngs have melted away, leaving the city more intimate, more mysterious. Here, the clamour has been replaced by the soft murmurs of whispered conversations, the distant echo of footsteps, and the gentle splash of water in nearby fountains. Night walking offers a gentle contrast to the relentless pace of daytime life. By night, the city breathes differently. The crowds thin, the noise subsides, and a quiet stillness invites introspection and slow wandering. For many, this was the only time to enjoy peace and solitude, away from the cramped, noisy conditions of Georgian homes, where multiple families often shared a single room. It's easy to see how night walking became a subtle form of escape, a way to reclaim one's personal space and mental calm amid the pressures of urban existence. The practice served various practical functions as well. Many labourers, shopkeepers and servants found themselves working late into the night or taking on additional jobs to make ends meet. For them, night walking was simply part of their daily rhythm, a necessary passage between shifts or errands. Others used the cover of darkness for social purposes. Courting couples, in particular, cherished the anonymity the night provided. In an era when strict social codes governed interactions between men and women, the dimly lit streets offered a rare opportunity for secret meetings and whispered conversations without prying eyes. Historians continue to debate the nature and significance of night walking in Georgian London. Some argue that it was primarily a form of leisure, a gentle rebellion against the regimented routines of the day, a way for people to slow down and connect with the city on their own terms. Others see it more as a response to economic necessity or social pressures, a pragmatic adaptation to the demands of urban life, where privacy and free time were scarce commodities. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Night walking was a fluid practice, serving different roles for different people, all woven into the complex social fabric of the time. You pause for a moment to take in the sensory details around you. The soft glow of gas lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls, flickering as the flames struggle against the cool night air. The faint scent of damp stone, wood smoke, and the occasional waft of cooking fires from nearby taverns fills your nostrils. In the distance, a dog's bark breaks the quiet, followed by the low murmur of voices blending with the gentle rustling of leaves in a nearby park. Each sound, each scent, feels amplified in the calm, inviting you to listen more closely to the city's nocturnal heartbeat. As you continue your walk, you notice the variety of people sharing this space. There's an older gentleman wrapped in a thick cloak, perhaps returning from a late business meeting, his steps measured and deliberate. Nearby, a group of young apprentices chatter quietly, their laughter muted but genuine as they enjoy a brief respite from their demanding day jobs. Across the street, two women exchange a few hurried words before disappearing down a narrow lane, perhaps a brief, secretive rendezvous. Each figure adds a new thread to the tapestry of the night, a living mosaic of the city's diverse inhabitants. In some quarters, the night-walking tradition even took on an almost ritualistic quality. Certain streets and parks became favoured routes, known among locals for their beauty, safety, or the quality of the air. Historians have uncovered references to night promenades, where groups of citizens would deliberately stroll for health, fresh air, or companionship. These outings were gentle affairs, often accompanied by soft music from street performers or the occasional glimpse of candlelight flickering through windows. Yet, the city's nighttime also held its dangers. The dim light and narrow alleys could conceal pickpockets or worse, and the police force was still developing, with limited patrols after dark. This meant that while many found solace in night walking, others had to be cautious and quick. The risk added an element of quiet thrill to the practice, a reminder that the city was a living organism full of surprises, both gentle and unpredictable. You recall earlier sections of your journey, like the warm, social bustle of the public baths or the intellectual hum of coffee houses by day, and notice how night walking offers a complementary experience, a slower, softer, more introspective way of connecting with Georgian London. It's as if the city offers two different personalities, one vibrant and social in the daylight, the other intimate and contemplative in the moonlight. As your walk draws to a close, you find yourself standing at the edge of a small square, the gas lamps casting a warm halo around the benches and trees. The quiet here invites you to pause, to breathe deeply, and to feel the city's pulse beneath your feet. You realize that night walking was not just about moving through space, but about moving through time, a gentle journey into the quieter, often overlooked moments that give life its texture. You smile softly to yourself, knowing that this simple practice of wandering by night helped countless Londoners find balance, peace, and sometimes even joy in the midst of their hectic lives. And as you turn back toward the brighter streets leading home, you carry with you a newfound appreciation for the subtle, soothing rhythms of Georgian London after dark. As the soft amber glow of gas lamps fades behind you, and the quiet of the night settles deep into Georgian London, your footsteps carry you toward a less bustling part of the city. This neighbourhood, unlike the vibrant markets or grand townhouses you've seen earlier, holds a quieter secret, a culinary tradition that seems almost whimsical and peculiar through today's eyes. You're about to enter the world of the midnight breakfast, a practice that might sound confusing or downright strange, but was, in fact, an accepted and even cherished part of London life during the 18th century. Picture this. The clock has long since chimed midnight. The streets outside are hushed, with only the faint echo of a carriage or distant footfall. Yet inside a warmly lit kitchen, a hearth fire crackles softly. The comforting aroma of fresh bread baking mingled with the rich scent of brewed coffee fills the air. Plates heaped with slices of salted butter, pots of thick cream, and a skillet sizzling gently with eggs and bacon are laid out on a well-worn wooden table. This is breakfast, but not the breakfast you're probably imagining. This is a meal eaten deep in the night, a tradition firmly established in the daily rhythms of Georgian Londoners. Now, you might wonder, why on earth would anyone eat breakfast at midnight? To understand, you have to immerse yourself in the daily lives and social customs of the time. The concept of a fixed daylight breakfast as we know it today was far from universal. For many Londoners, the day began long before dawn, sometimes as early as 4 a.m. or even earlier, depending on one's trade or social class. For labourers, bakers, dock workers, and others whose workdays started in the early hours, eating a substantial meal before heading out was essential. But here's the twist. That meal often happened around midnight, after a night's rest and before the day's first shift. So, to the outside observer, this breakfast might look like a late-night snack or an odd scheduling choice, but for them, it was simply the first meal of the day. Beyond the practical side, there was also a social dimension to this habit. The aristocracy and their household servants operated on a different schedule altogether. Dinner could stretch late into the evening, sometimes well past 10 or 11 p.m., especially during social seasons filled with balls, dinners, and other entertainments. After these late suppers, a light meal or breakfast would follow, especially for those who planned to rise early or entertain guests who lingered into the wee hours. In grand houses, servants would often rise before their masters, eating a breakfast before beginning their early morning duties. Sometimes these meals took place so late at night they blurred into what we would now call midnight. The idea of a midnight breakfast challenges modern assumptions about daily routines, reminding us that the rigid schedules we often take for granted are relatively new. Instead, Georgian London's clock was more flexible, attuned to the demands of work, socialising and sleep cycles that didn't always align with sunrise. You imagine the scene vividly. A sturdy wooden table surrounded by flickering candlelight, a steaming pot of coffee, which was then a fashionable and somewhat exotic beverage imported from distant lands, signifying a growing global trade network. Coffee houses were thriving hubs of conversation and commerce by day, and at home, coffee formed part of the ritual that accompanied these late-night or early morning meals. Alongside the coffee, thick, crusty bread was served, often homemade or from local bakeries, slathered with fresh cream or honey. Eggs, fried or boiled, sometimes accompanied by cured meats like bacon or sausages, completed the meal. Though the concept of breakfast foods was less standardized than today, these ingredients formed the core of a nourishing start to a long day. Interestingly, historians continue to debate the origins and cultural significance of midnight breakfast. Was it purely a matter of practicality, born from the unusual work schedules and social demands of Georgian London? Or was it also a subtle statement about lifestyle and identity, an element of urban culture that set city dwellers apart from their rural counterparts? Some scholars suggest that the habit also reflects the city's growing embrace of nocturnal life and entertainment, from theatres to coffee houses to taverns, where the boundaries between day and night blurred. Moreover, the midnight breakfast was not merely about physical nourishment. It was a moment of ritual, comfort, and connection. For families and households, gathering round the table, even if the hour was unconventional, provided a sense of togetherness and routine. In a city where privacy was scarce and living quarters cramped, these shared meals offered a brief respite and a chance to bond. The very act of eating together at such odd hours helped mark the rhythms of life in a bustling metropolis, where time was elastic and dictated as much by social custom as by the rising sun. You can almost hear the clinking of ceramic cups and plates, the soft murmur of conversation in the flickering candlelight. The conversation might turn to plans for the day ahead, gossip about neighbours, or reflections on the strange turn of the weather. Coffee, still a novelty for many, adds a stimulating edge to the meal, awakening senses dulled by sleep but welcoming the promise of a new day. One particularly charming fringe detail emerges from contemporary accounts. In some London neighbourhoods, vendors specialised in breakfast provisions delivered at odd hours, catering to those who required food during the night. These early versions of food delivery services ensured that fresh eggs, bread and other essentials could arrive even after midnight, allowing households to maintain their unusual schedules without interruption. It's a quaint image, vendors navigating shadowy streets with baskets of food while the rest of the city sleeps. You also encounter evidence that the midnight breakfast might have been linked to health beliefs of the time. Georgian medicine often recommended light, frequent meals, and emphasized the importance of regulating one's diet according to the body's needs. Eating a substantial meal before starting work in the cold early morning was thought to fortify the body against fatigue and illness. Historians still argue whether these medical theories genuinely influenced common practice, or if they were more aspirational advice given by the elite. But the connection between diet and health was certainly part of the conversation. This midnight breakfast tradition even seeped into literary culture. Writers and poets of the era occasionally reference late-night meals and the quiet intimacy of these moments. They painted pictures of a city where life pulsed on well past sunset, and where, in the stillness of the night, individuals found comfort and routine amid the unpredictability of urban living. As you reflect on all this, it becomes clear how something as simple as a meal's timing can reveal so much about a culture's values, challenges, and rhythms. The midnight breakfast is a testament to human adaptability and the inventive ways people shaped their lives to meet the demands of their environment. It also offers a glimpse into the sensory world of Georgian Londoners, the smells, the warmth, the tactile comfort of food prepared and shared in the quiet hours before dawn. This insight complements the earlier picture of night walking and other nocturnal customs, painting a fuller portrait of a city alive in ways that might surprise the modern observer. Together, these glimpses encourage you to reconsider your own assumptions about daily life, time, and the delicate balance between work, rest, and pleasure. You find yourself smiling softly, warmed by the thought of a simple meal taken in good company, even if the hour seems strange now. It's a reminder that every era has its own unique rhythms, sometimes puzzling to outsiders but deeply meaningful to those who live them. And as you slowly step away from the imagined kitchen scene and back into the quiet streets, you carry with you the comforting knowledge that Georgian London's midnight breakfast was more than just food. It was a ritual, a social glue, and a gentle rebellion against the clock. A small, nourishing light in the vast, complex web of urban life. As you leave the warm kitchen of the midnight breakfast behind, the quiet streets of Georgian London begin to unfold around you like a mysterious, shadowy stage. The familiar daytime hustle, the raucous calls of street vendors, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, and the lively chatter of market stalls has given way to a softer, more secretive rhythm. Night has fully descended, draping the city in thick fog and long shadows, and in this dimly lit world a peculiar practice comes alive, the art of night walking. Now don't mistake night walking for the simple, peaceful strolls we might take today. In Georgian London, night walking was something altogether different, part necessity, part ritual, and part social phenomenon. This wasn't just about stretching your legs or getting fresh air after dinner. For many Londoners, night walking was a crucial part of life, woven deeply into the social fabric and practical realities of the city after dark. You start by imagining yourself stepping cautiously out into the narrow, cobbled streets. The gas lamps flicker uncertainly, casting long, wavering shadows that dance across brick walls and shuttered windows. The air smells faintly of wet earth, wood smoke from nearby hearths, and a hint of something sweet from a closed bakery. Your footsteps echo softly on the stones, mingling with distant church bells that toll the late hour. Around you, the city feels both alive and hushed, as if holding its breath in the quiet darkness. In this twilight world, night walking took on many faces. For the working class, it was a necessity. Many labourers, apprentices and tradespeople began their days before dawn or finished late shifts at docks, warehouses and factories. After hours underground or in candlelit workshops, a nighttime walk was a way to shake off the fatigue, get some fresh air, or run essential errands before heading home to rest. The city's geography, full of winding alleys, hidden courtyards and twisting lanes, was an open playground for these wanderers. But night walking was not just practical, it was a form of social interaction. In the shadows, people could step outside the strict hierarchies and formalities of daytime life. Gentlemen might stroll alongside artisans, servants would mingle quietly with acquaintances, and even the city's more secretive figures, courtesans, informants and others, used the night to move unseen. The streets became a subtle stage where glances, gestures and whispered conversations created a hidden language. Historians still debate the full meaning and impact of night walking. Was it a quiet rebellion against the rigid social order, a way for the lower classes to assert a measure of freedom? Or was it simply the byproduct of a city that never quite slept, where the rhythms of work and play blurred into one? What is clear is that night walking shaped the nocturnal culture of Georgian London, crafting a world where night was not empty but full of life and coded human connection. One particularly fascinating detail was the use of lanterns as social signals. Nightwalkers often carried small lanterns, but these were not just for illumination. The way a lantern was held, its size, or even the colour of the glass could signal a person's occupation or intentions. For example, a blue-tinted lantern might indicate a doctor or apothecary on a call, while a red lantern could warn of danger or mark a watchman. This unspoken code allowed people to navigate the streets with a shared understanding that words might not express so easily. It was a form of communication that turned simple objects into tools of social navigation. The sensory experience of night walking was deeply immersive. Without the daytime noise to mask sounds, every footstep, distant laugh, or rustling leaf was amplified. The occasional bark of a dog, the shuffle of rats in the gutters, and the murmur of hushed voices created a soundtrack both eerie and comforting. The dampness of the fog clung to your skin, and the cool night air tingled with the promise of dawn yet to come. Yet the night was not without its dangers. Night walking had a shadowy reputation. City officials and moral guardians feared that darkness encouraged mischief, illicit meetings, or even crime. Patrols were established, and laws enacted to regulate who could be on the streets and when. Some neighbourhoods were considered safer, while others were avoided after dark. Still, the practice persisted, proving that the needs and rhythms of the people often outweighed official attempts to control the night. This tension between freedom and regulation made night walking a complex cultural phenomenon. It was a dance between risk and routine, between the allure of the night's privacy and the dangers lurking in its depths. The fact that night walking survived, and even thrived, speaks to its importance as a social ritual and survival strategy. Interestingly, night walking also found its way into the arts. Georgian writers and poets occasionally romanticized the figure of the night walker, a solitary silhouette moving silently through misty streets, carrying secrets or seeking solace. These literary images added a layer of mystique to the practice, elevating it beyond mere habit to something poetic and timeless. You think about how night walking reflects broader truths about human life, our need for connection, freedom, and routine even when the world seems still and quiet. The night walkers were not just anonymous shadows, they were people living layered, complex lives, navigating their city with resilience and creativity. In this, night walking complements other nocturnal customs you've encountered, like the midnight breakfast or evening social gatherings, painting a fuller picture of a city alive and breathing after dark. Together, these customs challenge modern ideas of day and night, rest and activity, and remind you that time itself is flexible and shaped by human needs and desires. As you finally turn your footsteps back toward the first signs of dawn, when gas lamps flicker out and the city stirs to new life, you carry with you a new appreciation for these night walkers. Their quiet journeys through the fog and shadow remind you that even in the darkest hours, life finds a way to move, to connect, and to endure. You continue your slow, deliberate journey through the quiet, foggy streets of Georgian London, letting the soft sounds of the night envelop you. As the city breathes in the stillness, your thoughts turn toward a quieter, more intimate practice many Londoners embraced in these late hours: the art of night prayers and spiritual reflection. This wasn't the grand, ornate church service you might picture during the day, but a humble, deeply personal ritual performed by candlelight in the solitude of one's own room or a small chapel's quiet corner. Picture yourself stepping into a modest room where a lone figure kneels before a small wooden prayer desk, the soft glow of a beeswax candle flickering gently, casting warm shadows on the worn walls, the city's muffled noises, the occasional distant footfall on cobblestones, a church bell tolling the late hour and the whispering wind fade into the background, replaced by the quiet rhythm of whispered prayers and the slow, soothing motion of fingers tracing prayer beads. This is the world of Georgian night prayers, a world where the spiritual and the mundane quietly intertwine under the cover of darkness. Night prayers were not only acts of religious devotion, they were also moments of emotional release and reflection. After a long day of labour, worry, or social duties, many Londoners found comfort in this sacred pause. The practice gave them a chance to offload their anxieties, voice hopes, and seek peace. You feel the weight of the day lift gently as you imagine the whispered words floating upward, small acts of faith or pleas for protection that seemed especially potent at midnight. Historians still debate just how widespread these nightly devotions were. Were they primarily the habit of the more devout, or did even the more secular find themselves drawn to the quiet solace of prayer when the world was asleep? Either way, the fact that such rituals existed across many strata of society tells you something profound about human nature, the universal need to find calm and meaning when the day's noise fades away. An intriguing and somewhat charming aspect of these prayers was the use of prayer beads, often overlooked in accounts of Georgian spirituality. These beads were typically crafted from wood, glass, or occasionally semi-precious stones, and they were small enough to fit comfortably in one's hand or pocket. You can almost imagine the comforting texture of smooth beads passing slowly between the fingers, the repetition providing a meditative rhythm that guided the mind away from fretful thoughts and into a gentler, more peaceful state. Some families cherished these beads as heirlooms, while others received them as gifts from clergy or kind neighbours, imbuing the objects with personal and communal significance. The sensory world surrounding these night prayers was subtle but rich. The flickering candlelight created a dance of shadows on cracked plaster walls, sometimes revealing the faint outline of a framed religious image or a small shelf holding cherished mementos. The scent of the candle's beeswax mixed with faint traces of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary or sage, that many households burned to purify the air or soothe restless minds. Occasionally a soft breeze would ruffle loose papers or curtains, carrying with it the distant murmur of a choir practicing, or the faint tolling of a bell from a nearby church tower, weaving a quiet hymn into the night's fabric. These moments were more than just spiritual exercises. They were entwined with the era's evolving beliefs about health and well-being. Many Georgian Londoners believed that praying at midnight could protect loved ones from illness or evil spirits lurking in the dark. It was a time when religion, superstition, and emerging medical practices overlapped in daily life. The midnight hour was thought to hold special power, a liminal time when the veil between the natural and supernatural thinned. For parents, this might mean whispering prayers over a sleeping child. For the sick, a desperate plea for healing, and for the anxious, a ritual to stave off nightmares or insomnia. You can almost hear the soft murmur of these prayers carried through the quiet streets, an unseen chorus of private hopes and fears that bound the community together despite social differences. It's a beautiful, humbling thought that beneath the visible layers of commerce, politics, and daily toil, there existed these shared threads of faith and humanity, woven quietly into the night. Of course, these spiritual practices did not exist without challenges or controversy. The authorities and some religious leaders occasionally expressed concern that such private prayers, especially those outside official church settings, might stray into superstition or heterodoxy. Yet, despite any official admonitions, the nightly practice endured, testifying to its importance in personal and communal life. It was a way to claim a small measure of control and comfort in an unpredictable world. As you imagine yourself joining this silent prayer circle, you feel a wave of calm wash over you. There is no rush, no demand for answers, just the gentle cadence of breath, the touch of smooth beads, and the quiet glow of candlelight. The night seems to cradle you in its soft embrace, reminding you that even in the darkest hours, there is a space for hope, reflection, and peace. Looking back, these night prayers reveal a deeply human truth. They show how people seek balance between the visible and invisible, the known and the unknown. They remind you that amidst the bustle of a sprawling city and the noise of history, the quiet moments of faith and contemplation carry a timeless grace. And as the first light of dawn begins to touch the sky, you sense that this ancient ritual of night prayer still lives on, in the way people today find stillness before sleep or seek comfort in moments of silence. In the hush of these early morning hours, you carry this sense of calm forward, gently closing the door behind you as you prepare to step back into the waking world, reassured that the night, with all its quiet mysteries, has offered you a rare and gentle sanctuary. The early morning hours begin to soften the night's shadows as the city stirs once more, and your thoughts turn naturally to the peculiar ways Georgian Londoners marked the transition from night to day. While most of us are familiar with the modern ritual of coffee or a quick breakfast, the dawn habits of this period were layered with symbolism, practicality, and a touch of genteel ceremony that might surprise you. Imagine yourself in a modest London bedroom just before first light, the pale grey light filtering through heavy curtains. The household stirs slowly. Chambermaids begin their chores, merchants prepare their ledgers, and watchmen, having patrolled the night, finally return to rest. But for many, the moment between night and day was also a time for a unique blend of hygiene, fashion, and social signalling, a morning ritual that combined the practical with the poetic. One particularly curious custom was the morning powdering ritual. While powdered wigs are well known as an iconic symbol of the era, what you might not realise is that the practice of applying powders and perfumes began very early in the day. Powder was not only a fashion statement, but also a way to mask the odours of a less hygienic age. The smell of tobacco, sweat, and city grime was pervasive, so white or scented powders were applied not just to wigs, but also to skin and even clothing. This early morning powdering was often accompanied by the delicate ritual of perfuming with lavender, rosemary, or even ambergris, ingredients that sound exotic but were surprisingly common in Georgian households. Historians still argue about whether the powdering ritual was more about vanity or a genuine attempt at cleanliness in an era when regular bathing was less frequent. What is clear is that this process became a socially significant marker. Wear your powder well, and you signalled refinement and respectability, while a lack of it could brand you as careless or low status. The morning scent was your first social statement of the day. Another fascinating detail is the role of morning newspapers and broadsheets, which were beginning to circulate widely by the late Georgian period. These were not the flashy tabloids of today, but carefully printed sheets containing news, advertisements, and announcements. For many Londoners, the morning reading ritual, sometimes conducted over a cup of tea, was a quiet way to catch up on city gossip, political developments, or even theatre reviews. This early morning information gathering shaped public opinion and set the tone for the day's conversations. The sensory world of this dawn routine was vivid. The scent of fresh coffee or tea mingled with the sharp tang of powder and perfume. The sound of quills scratching on paper blended with distant street cries as vendors began setting up stalls. The first rays of sunlight warmed chilled faces and lit up dew-covered cobblestones, promising a new day's possibilities. You might smile to know that some of these morning habits even included peculiar health advice. Victorian and late Georgian insomnia cures often recommended exposure to early morning air or bracing walks at dawn to stimulate the body's natural rhythms. Though the science was rudimentary, the idea that fresh air could reset your internal clock has a timeless appeal, and many Londoners embraced this advice with a mixture of sincerity and fashionable enthusiasm. Of course, not everyone greeted the dawn with cheer. For some, particularly the poor or those working multiple jobs, the morning was a relentless return to hardship. Yet, even here, morning rituals provided small moments of order and dignity. The careful donning of a hat, a quick washing of the face at a public pump, or a borrowed glance at a neighbour's powdered wig could offer a fleeting sense of normalcy and belonging. As you think about these dawn customs, you realise they reveal much about the balance Georgian Londoners sought between necessity and expression, between survival and social grace. Their mornings, like their nights, were a dance of practical actions infused with meaning, a ritualised way of stepping into the day that connected body, mind and community. And so, as the first light fully awakens the city, you carry this gentle rhythm forward, appreciating how even the smallest morning habits tell stories of identity, hope and resilience in the bustling life of Georgian London. As the soft glow of dawn fades into the bright light of morning, you find yourself standing on a bustling Georgian London street, letting the sounds of the city wash over you like a living, breathing organism. The city is alive, not just with people moving about, but with an entire symphony of sounds that create its unique rhythm. It's a world of noises both familiar and strange, carefully woven together to form the soundtrack of daily life in the 18th century. If you listen closely, you'll discover that these sounds tell stories all on their own. Stories of commerce, community, safety and survival. Imagine the cobblestones beneath your feet, worn smooth by countless footsteps, wheels and hooves. The creak and rumble of wooden cartwheels rolling over stone echoes softly in the morning air. blending with the sharp clicks of horse hooves clacking on pavement. A coachman's whip cracks through the stillness now and then, a quick, sharp sound signalling urgency or direction. Overhead, the early morning light filters through a haze of smoke and fog, softening the scene like a faded painting. Around you, the city's inhabitants begin their day. A street vendor calls out in a melodic voice, offering fresh fish or textiles. His cry carries through the narrow alleyways, bouncing off brick walls and cobblestones, seeking customers amid the morning bustle. Nearby, a shoemaker hammers softly at leather, his rhythmic tapping mingling with the murmur of early conversations. Children scamper through courtyards, their laughter bright and light, punctuating the hum of adult voices. Among the most distinctive sounds are the calls of the watchmen, those dedicated guardians of the night and early morning. You hear their voices echoing down alleys, calling out the time and the reassuring phrase, "All's well." These calls served as an auditory shield against the chaos that might threaten the fragile peace of the city's slumbering hours. The watchmen's calls were not just routine announcements, but a lifeline, a collective promise that the city remained safe, at least for now. The soundscape of Georgian London was not left to chance. It was shaped by laws and customs designed to balance the needs of commerce, social life, and rest. Nighttime noise restrictions were intended to grant residents some quiet, but enforcing these rules was a constant challenge. The cacophony of hawkers, carts, and people often spilled over into forbidden hours, creating a lively, if somewhat unruly, urban chorus. One particularly charming element of this sonic tapestry was the knocker-upper, an almost forgotten profession that might make you smile. Before alarm clocks were common, knocker-uppers were hired to wake workers in time for early shifts by tapping on their bedroom windows with long sticks, sometimes tipped with soft materials like cork or leather. Imagine the patient, rhythmic tapping in the quiet pre-dawn hours, a human alarm clock making its rounds through foggy streets. You might find this quaint or intrusive, but for many it was a lifeline between sleep and work. Historians still debate the overall impact of this noisy environment. Some argue that the lively street sounds fostered a sense of community and connection, the shared soundscape creating a dynamic public culture. Others suggest the constant noise was a source of stress, especially in densely packed neighbourhoods, making daily life more challenging. What is clear is that these sounds were integral to the city's character, shaping how people experienced their surroundings and each other. Diversity played a significant role in the city's auditory mosaic. Georgian London was a melting pot of cultures and languages, and this was reflected in its streets' voices. You might overhear Irish brogues mixing with French accents, Yiddish phrases from Jewish merchants, or the clipped tones of Cockney Londoners. This linguistic variety added richness to the soundscape, a living testament to the city's multicultural heart long before modern times. Amid the hustle and bustle, you can find moments of quieter sound valued for their soothing or functional roles. Side streets and small gardens offered refuge from the noisy markets, their calm punctuated by birdsong or the gentle rustling of leaves. The regular chiming of church bells marked the hours, providing a steady temporal anchor in an otherwise unpredictable day. Fountains and wells contributed their gentle splashes and drips, blending with the occasional clip-clop of a solitary horse trotting by. In this world, sound was also a critical tool of communication. Without telephones or modern messaging, Londoners relied on auditory signals to convey information quickly and politely. Small personal bells or whistles were common among wealthier households, used to summon servants or discreetly call neighbours. These subtle sounds carried messages with efficiency and grace, a quiet language woven into the daily rhythm. The importance of sound extended beyond mere communication. It shaped social interaction and identity. The way someone spoke, the timbre of their voice, even the cadence of their steps could signal their class, occupation, or origin. For example, the clipped, precise tones of a merchant contrasted with the rougher accent of a dock worker, and both were as recognisable to Londoners as their clothing. Sound marked the boundaries of social worlds while also bridging them in marketplaces and taverns. You might smile at the thought that these sound habits formed a kind of citywide orchestra, each participant playing a part in the urban symphony. There was an artfulness in the cacophony, a rhythm that brought order to chaos, connecting people across streets and neighbourhoods. This orchestra was improvisational and alive, adjusting to the ebb and flow of the city's pulse. Considering all this, you realise that sound was more than background noise in Georgian London. It was a vibrant, essential part of life. Every shout, clatter and whisper carried meaning, helping to structure time, space and social relations. Listening closely, you feel transported into the heart of the city's living history, where voices and noises mingle to tell stories as vivid as any written record. And as you stand there, immersed in this ancient soundscape, you recognise a timeless truth. The sounds that shape a city are as important as its buildings or people, capturing its spirit in a way that lingers long after the streets have quieted. You carry this sense of auditory connection with you, grateful for the rich, complex chorus that once made Georgian London not just a place to live, but a place to hear, feel, and belong. You find yourself retreating from the noise, the smoke, and the 1,000 bustling corners of Georgian London. The city has a pulse, lively, relentless, full of clatter and chatter. But now, your steps slow. You follow a narrow footpath lined with mossy bricks, duck under an arched iron gate that creaks gently on its hinges, and suddenly the city hushes. Before you lies one of the era's true luxuries, a quiet green garden. It's not enormous, nothing like the manicured palace gardens or the royal park sprawling out on the city's edge, but it is something better. It's secret, sheltered, human in scale. The kind of place tucked behind a townhouse, framed by high brick walls and shaded by carefully trimmed hedges. As you pass through, the gravel crunches underfoot in a rhythm that seems to slow time. The breeze carries the sweet, earthy scent of crushed rosemary and lavender, and the faint, chalky smell of damp stone warmed by filtered sunlight. In a city still heavily defined by soot-darkened buildings and tightly packed tenements, green spaces were cherished like pearls in a drawer. If you were wealthy, you might have one right outside your morning room, a walled enclosure with roses climbing trellises, stone urns full of peonies, or even a small fountain where sparrows dipped their wings. If you weren't so fortunate, you might still find solace in communal gardens, small squares shared by residents or hidden pockets of cultivated land nestled in working-class courtyards. You sit on a wooden bench worn smooth with time, the wood pale where fingers and seasons have polished it. There's a gooseberry bush to your right, and a slow-moving bumblebee lingers there, ignoring you entirely. The ambient noise here is different from the clamour of London proper. It's softer. You can hear the occasional rustle of skirts as someone strolls by, the distant song of a blackbird, and the gentle creak of a gardener's wheelbarrow just out of sight. If someone were reading poetry aloud under a shaded arbour, it would feel utterly natural, and that wouldn't be unusual. In Georgian society, gardens were not just spaces of greenery. They were stages for performance, for display, and for conversation. Strolling through the garden was a social ritual. Lovers exchanged glances between hedges. Ladies compared their botanical knowledge, pointing out a prized hyacinth or debating the benefits of clover tea for indigestion. Gentlemen might pause to quote Virgil or discuss the latest horticultural pamphlet sent from Edinburgh or Bath. In this verdant bubble, conversation bloomed just as much as the jasmine. Historians still debate how inclusive these spaces were. Certainly the grand gardens belonged to those of wealth and rank, and access was often tightly controlled. But some city planners recognised the importance of green spaces for public health, though admittedly they were more concerned about moral health than greenery itself. By the late 18th century, a few philanthropic efforts began creating small parks open to the working public, though these were often located in areas deemed improvable by Georgian standards, a euphemism for neighbourhoods in need of polite influence. Still, the desire for garden space extended well beyond the elite. Tenants with even a few feet of dirt to work with might grow herbs, flowers, or even vegetables. Rosemary, thyme, mint and chamomile were common. Lavender was practically a household essential. Not only did it smell lovely, but it could ward off insects and soothe nerves. You can imagine a young maid, after finishing her morning chores, kneeling beside a pot of marjoram, brushing her hand through the leaves for a moment of quiet before returning to the noise of kitchen life. Many homes had window boxes or climbing vines, trying to coax nature into every crevice of brick and mortar. There's even evidence of rooftop gardens, small-scale attempts to grow something, anything that could offer a breath of nature above the dense London streets. That desire to touch something green, to nurture a little life, persisted no matter one's address. Some gardens were more than just a pretty face, they were medicinal. Apothecary gardens, both public and private, were stocked with plants believed to heal. Feverfew for headaches, valerian for nerves, foxglove, dangerous but effective in skilled hands, for the heart. It was a blend of folklore and early science, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, whispered in kitchens and written in the margins of prayer books. You pause at a neatly labelled bed of herbs and smile. The signs are handwritten in copperplate: angelica, borage, lemon balm. You run your fingers over the tops of the leaves, the scent released with a whisper. It's easy to see how people felt restored here, not just in body but in spirit. Curiously, the obsession with greenery in Georgian London also reflected global ambitions. Botanical gardens like Kew became showcases of imperial reach. Seeds and cuttings came from Africa, Asia, the Americas, transported in carefully packed crates aboard ships, tended to by botanists, sailors, and sometimes surviving only by miracle. Georgian Londoners delighted in the exotic, displaying pineapples at dinner parties not to eat, but to admire. Pineapples were so prestigious that one could rent them for an evening as a centrepiece. This longing for exotic flora also filtered into private gardens. If someone had connections, they might boast a small banana plant in a hothouse, or an unusual lily from China. These weren't just plants, they were status symbols, storytelling tools, and quiet nods to empire. It's a little odd to think of imperial conquest reflected in something as gentle as a tulip bulb, but that's history for you. Full of contradiction, beauty, and shadow in equal measure. At the heart of all this, though, was a simple truth. Gardens soothed. In a city that rarely slept, where danger could lurk in alleys and soot clung to every surface, a green retreat, even a modest one, was like a deep breath after a long day. The philosopher John Locke once wrote that the mind, like a garden, needed tending. Georgian Londoners might not have read Locke, but they lived his sentiment. You lean back on the bench, the sounds of the city now just a hum on the horizon. A cat slips through the hedge, tail upright, disappearing beneath a hydrangea bush. Somewhere beyond the walls, a carriage clatters over cobblestones, and a newspaper boy shouts the morning's headlines. But here, all of that is softened, blurred. You feel your shoulders loosen, your breath deepen. Even the plants themselves seem designed to lull. Trailing vines that sway gently in the wind, sleepy lilacs nodding in the breeze, tiny blossoms that seem to exhale calm. It's easy to imagine someone falling asleep right here in the garden. A book folded in their lap, the sun warming their face. Of course, not all gardens were havens. Some were battlefields in their own right. Between tenant and landlord, between wild and tame. There are accounts of squabbles over who had access to which patch of land, or whether gooseberry bushes were fair game to curious children. But even those tensions underscore how deeply people valued these green spaces. So you sit there, quietly grateful, watching as a few golden leaves drift from a tree overhead and settle near your feet. The garden is timeless, a space outside of the city's urgency, and in its stillness you find something precious, the permission to pause. The city has begun to stir in earnest now. Georgian London hums beneath the rising sun, and the peaceful hush of the garden slips behind you as you wander once again into the rhythmic dance of streets, boots on cobblestones, and distant bells tolling the hour. But something in you has changed. The quiet of the green space lingers in your bones, like a pleasant residue, softening your steps and sharpening your eye for little details others might miss. You find yourself in Spitalfields, just east of the city proper, a place that bustles with traders, artisans, and an ever-changing kaleidoscope of accents and faces. Here, the city's heartbeat is louder, quicker. The smell of fresh bread mingles with the sharpness of coal smoke and the faint aroma of sheep's wool from a nearby cart. But beneath the ordinary street activity lies another fascinating corner of Georgian life, the world of night work. The truth is, not everyone in London operated on a daylight schedule. In fact, quite a few trades, and lives, thrived precisely because they operated when everyone else was asleep. And as you drift down a side alley, lit dimly by the golden flicker of an early street lamp, you start to notice them. Night watchmen in thick cloaks patrol the quietest corners, swinging lanterns and calling the hour in a rhythmic chant, half lullaby, half warning. Their voices echo gently through the lanes. 1 o'clock and all is well. Their job isn't simply to guard property. They're also there to make people feel safer, or at least to pretend that someone is watching when the darkness deepens. Historians still argue whether these watchmen were effective. Some say they were little more than sleepy sentries leaning on pikes. Others argue that their presence alone deterred the worst impulses of the night. Either way, their chants became part of the city's atmosphere, a kind of living metronome against the silence. You pass by a bakery just beginning to breathe. The air here is thick with yeast and flour, and through the open shutters you see the first loaves of the day taking shape. Bakers were among the earliest risers, or more accurately, they were among those who never really slept. Their ovens were fueled during the darkest hours, their doughs kneaded in time with the stars, not the sun. The baker's assistant wipes sweat from his brow, his hands coated in flour, as he hums a quiet tune to keep himself company. And then there are the market porters. You see them next, slinging heavy sacks of vegetables and bundles of fish from carts into shaded stalls. These men, broad-shouldered, red-faced, perform their labour with practised ease. By the time most of London stirs for breakfast, these men have already earned their keep for the day. Even the Thames is busy in these hours. River workers, ferrymen and lightermen guide low, flat boats along the water's surface. Lanterns swing from their bows, casting glints onto the river like tiny stars caught between ripples. There's a strange peace to it all. These are people who belong to the darkness, not in a nefarious sense, but as stewards of the city's nighttime economy. Curiously, many newspapers were also prepared at night. You pass by a small printer's shop and hear the whir and clack of a printing press in motion. Ink-stained apprentices feed sheets into the rollers, preparing the morning's edition. By the time a gentleman in Marylebone yawns over his breakfast coffee, the news has already been inked, folded, and delivered by lamplight. One of the more overlooked nighttime figures is the link boy. These were often children or teenagers, hired to carry torches and guide wealthier pedestrians through the poorly lit streets. For a penny or two, they would illuminate a path from carriage to door, or from pub to home, depending on the circumstances. Their presence was essential in a city where streets were dark, unpredictable and often dangerous. But not all night workers were born of necessity. Some trades simply flourished better in shadow. Tavern musicians, card dealers and pleasure house entertainers plied their arts well past midnight. The Georgian appetite for after-hours revelry ensured that certain parts of the city never truly slept. You walk now through Covent Garden, long before its market opens. The square is quiet, but you can imagine what it will become. The chatter of florists setting up stalls, the clatter of crates, the flirtatious calls of costermongers. But in this early light, it belongs to the sweepers, those who clear the remnants of the night before. They move slowly, pushing brooms over the cobblestones, sometimes pausing to curse a particularly sticky pile of orange peels, or to kick aside a broken glass bottle. Their work is humble but vital, like resetting the stage before the next act. As you walk on, the city seems to shimmer in its transformation. The quiet trades give way to the first yawning apprentices, the clinking of breakfast plates, and the creak of shop shutters rising for the day. But the people of the night don't vanish. They fade gently into their rest, curling up in narrow rooms, attics and sheds tucked behind bakeries and taverns. Some stretch out beside still warm ovens, others pull blankets over their heads as the rest of the world comes alive. It's a strange feeling, knowing that an entire layer of life exists while you sleep, that while some toss and turn in their beds, others are out tending ovens, guiding horses, composing headlines, or sweeping the dust of the day. It gives the city a different kind of heartbeat, one not ruled by clock towers and sunrise, but by dough, ink, smoke, and silence. You find a bench on the edge of a small square and sit for a moment. The air is changing now. You can smell the fresh morning. Damp stone, soft light, a hint of roasted coffee from somewhere nearby. And yet, in your ears, you still hear the echo of the watchman's call and the squeak of a baker's cartwheel. The night may be over, but its memory lingers, sweet and faint. In a world before electricity, before the constant hum of devices and digital clocks, the rhythms of darkness were more profound, more visible. Georgian London may have eaten breakfast at midnight, but it also whispered stories in those hours, conducted business, lived and breathed in a twilight that modern life often forgets. You let the morning light settle on your face, eyes half closed, as you drift somewhere between day and night, fully aware now that in London even darkness had a schedule and a cast of characters to bring it to life. By now, the sky over London is thoroughly awake. It's a pale, pewtery blue, streaked with soft clouds that seem to float like tea bags in milk. The last of the oil lamps have been snuffed. The city stretches and yawns, and the midnight breakfast crowd, those curious Georgians with their reversed circadian rhythms, have long since finished their eels and toast, their kidneys and cocoa, their quiet gossip over weak coffee brewed before sunrise. But you, still drifting through this world between sleep and waking, now find yourself drawn to a quieter edge of the city, south of the river. Not the glittering West End nor the chattering marketplaces, but to the meandering walkways of Bermondsey and Southwark. Back then, this was the land of tanners, vinegar distillers, and potboys scrubbing wooden casks. The Thames here smells different. Earthier, sharper, less perfume, more pickling. This is where the day's goods arrive, ferried in just as the city begins to crave them. The docks murmur with movement. Crates thump, ropes groan, and the cold morning fog clings to the hulls of boats like an extra layer of clothing. Porters bark orders, seagulls squabble over fish guts. But amid the bustle, one unmistakable aroma wafts through the haze. Coffee. Coffee houses were already open by now, some never closed. In Georgian London, they weren't just about caffeine. They were community bulletin boards, rumour mills, political salons, and stock markets wrapped into one. You duck into one near the docks now. The wood-panelled interior glows with candlelight. Men in crumpled neckcloths argue over trade routes and Royal Navy movements. A boy, barely old enough to reach the counter, shuffles around with a brass tray full of tiny porcelain cups. You find a corner table, the wood scarred with decades of spilled secrets. The coffee is bitter and a little burnt, but it warms your hands as you cradle the cup. A man at the next table mumbles something about Sultan Mahmud's latest blunder, while another nods sagely, as if he's met the Ottoman ruler himself. In truth, he's probably never been beyond Hackney. And then you realise these conversations are part of breakfast too, just as much as eggs or piklets or cold roast beef. Georgian breakfasts weren't always solitary, bleary-eyed affairs in dressing gowns. For the city's thinkers, merchants and busybodies, breakfast was sometimes a debate, a declaration, a duel of wits before the working day began. You recall what you've learned on this sleepy stroll. The timing of meals in Georgian London had little to do with sunrise. For some, breakfast came after midnight. For others, it was a mid-morning indulgence. And for the city's lowest classes, it might never arrive at all. The rhythms of the city were as diverse as its districts, driven by necessity, privilege, and habit. Historians still argue whether the Georgian breakfast was truly the start of the day, or simply a continuation of the night before. Was it a recovery meal for the drunk and disorderly, or a social lubricant for early risers? Was it a household ritual or a public performance? The answer, as with most things in history, is it depends. You wander again now, down back alleys where laundry flaps like ghostly flags and cats stretch across sun-warmed barrels. The city is louder, but you remain inside the bubble of quiet you've built over the course of the night. Even as coaches clatter past and shopkeepers call to one another, there's something gentle about this moment, a sense that time has folded in on itself. You pass a row of terraced houses. In one upper window, a woman pours hot water from a kettle into a porcelain teapot. Her sleeves are rolled. A child leans sleepily against the windowsill watching the world go by. The toast is already buttered. This too is breakfast. You start to feel as though you're walking through layers of the same city stacked on top of one another. One London full of powdered wigs and posset, one humming with chimney sweeps and fishwives, one glowing faintly with candlelight and the scent of coffee grounds. All of them real. All of them sharing the same streets, depending on who's awake. And what of those who weren't eating at midnight or polishing boots in alleyways? What of the poets, the philosophers, the quiet souls who simply listen to the city breathe? You pass by a small garret above a bookshop and imagine a young writer there scribbling ideas by lantern glow, pausing only to nibble a crust of bread and sip thin beer. Perhaps their work will never be published, their name never known, but their midnight breakfast sustained them just the same. It's funny, isn't it, how much history happens in the margins, not in grand battles or coronations, but in the odd quiet choices people make, like when to eat, like whether to sleep before or after work, like brewing tea at 2 a.m. or slicing cheese just before dawn. These are the small moments that shape the rhythm of life, yet they so rarely make the textbooks. And now, as the church bells mark another hour, 8 o'clock perhaps, you begin to feel your own fatigue set in. The streets are fully alive, but your limbs are growing heavier. It's as if your body has followed Georgian London's example. Wake for breakfast in the dead of night, wander through layers of the city's memory, and now it's time to rest. You find a quiet bench beneath a linden tree, its leaves just beginning to shiver in the morning breeze. The last of the street sweepers passes by with a nod. A milkmaid clinks bottles onto a doorstep. Somewhere behind you, a bakery bell chimes. But you close your eyes now, and the city softens again. Less like a noise, more like a lullaby. The Georgian world drifts away slowly. No sharp farewells. Just the hum of wheels on cobblestones, the soft sizzle of sausages, the fading voice of a link boy calling for work. The breakfast tables are cleared. The ink-stained printers have finally gone to bed. The sun is climbing higher. Let it. You've had your midnight feast. Now it's time to sleep. Word count, when 417, wind down, 300 words. The city grows distant now, like a dream dissolving on your tongue. You breathe a little slower. The sounds of breakfast, the clink of cups, the hiss of fire-warmed kettles, the flutter of morning newspapers fade into soft echoes. Even the cobblestones feel less solid beneath your feet, as if London itself is becoming lighter, sleepier. You're not walking anymore. Not really. You're drifting. Between time, between stories, between the folds of a city that never truly sleeps, but occasionally dozes with one eye open. The smell softened too. Not roasted coffee or coal smoke, but something fainter, like the scent of linen drying on a line, or rain evaporating from a slate rooftop. Familiar, but unplaceable. Comforting. You think of the bakers kneading dough in silence, of the printers folding pages still warm from the press, of watchmen humming to themselves between calls. They're all there, somewhere behind the veil of waking. And you, curled now perhaps beneath a warm blanket, are just another of the city's many sleepers. Your story folds gently into theirs, wrapped in steam and soot and stories told in whispers. Let your breath slow. Let your body soften. There is nothing left to do. Nowhere to go. Sleep is a street you've walked 1,000 times, and this time it welcomes you home. Shh. You're safe. You're still. You're asleep. End of story. Sweet dreams.